Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the mini accounting application. In this week's incredible training, I'm going to show you how to create this amazing mini accounting application complete with purchase orders, estimates, work orders, and invoices, along with an incredible transactions, and we have full inventory, tying that up with an incredible dashboard and an amazing comprehensive admin screen. It's going to be an incredible training. You won't want to miss it. So let's get started. All right, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really happy you can be here. I've got probably hands down the best application I have ever brought to you on a YouTube video, and I'm going to share all that with you today. So what is this? This is an incredible mini accounting application, and I've got complete with work orders. We have full work order management. We also have purchases. We're going to be able to purchase inventory and tie that into inventory. We also are going to have incredible invoicing, of course, work orders we have, and invoicing all tied up, right? We're going to be able to add new, copy to, save, update. We're also going to have inventory complete, adding new inventory, showing quantity on hand. We've got that for you. Transactions, we'll be able to create any transactions, loading transactions, searching and filtering for transactions based on multiple search events. And of course, we're going to have transactions and a dashboard. Inside the dashboard, I'm going to show you profit and loss, outstanding invoices and bill payments, top 10 products to order, monthly sales graph, all of course based on a date range. We're going to have a date range so we can show you how to create a really cool date range, changing that up. And of course, we've got a menu here and a comprehensive admin screen that's going to help you set defaults and fully customize this application, including your own names, your own IDs, and of course, your own accounts, right? So much to share with you on this training. You're going to learn so much. What are you going to learn in this training? Well, of course, you're going to learn basic and intermediate accounting skills. We're going to go over all of that. You can also learn how to handle database and record management, how to create records, how to update them, delete them. We'll learn about that, how to create invoices, purchase orders, and of course, their impact on the inventory. So we'll be going over that, all that inside the order management here. We're going to show you how to do that. And also, we're going to show you data mapping, how data mapping can reduce the number of lines of code substantially. So we'll be going complete over data mapping, how to use that inside your code. Also, robust conditional formatting. We've got a lot of conditional formatting. We're going to show you how to use that to make beautiful and useful applications. Of course, how to duplicate these orders. We can simply copy this to a purchase order if we need to order those items. I'm going to show you how to do that so we can quickly create brand new purchase orders, work orders, estimates, or invoices on a single click. And also dynamic named ranges. We're going to be using named ranges throughout this application. You're going to become an expert on named ranges. And also, of course, creating a comprehensive dashboard and how to use advanced filters combined with pivot charts to create beautiful charts and graphs. So we're going to do all that and a whole lot more. I hope you'll stick with us. It's going to be a long training, so make sure you grab your beverage of choice, take time out, and this is going to be incredible training. Even if you can't complete watching this training, it'll be always available on YouTube or your platform of choice. I'll make sure it's always available for you. You can return and watch it as many times as you want. If I do move quickly on this, you can also slow down the video if you need to. I did want to let you know of an incredible launch that we're having. I've got 250 of my best templates available for you in a single zip file now available. That's nearly every single application. And just today and now, I decided to offer a brand new free bonus. Now, this 250 was already built, this pack. All of my last templates have already been in there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to include this mini accounting application free as a free bonus to those people who purchased the 250 with PDF downloads. I'm going to make sure that you get this accounting application absolutely free template in there. Of course, that's going to also be included in our template library. That way, the template library is amazing because it's going to allow you a single click to open the application and another click to view the YouTube video training. So you'll always have those resources at your availability. All right, great. We're going to get started right away on this training because I've got so much to share with you on this. I just wanted to make sure a few things that you already have subscribed to the channel, and don't forget to click that notification icon bell. That'll ensure that you get these trainings each and every week. I make them available for you. Please don't forget to share this video, like it, comment below. I respond to each and every comment, so don't worry about that. I want to hear from you. This video training is for you, as it is each and every week. All right, so let's go over a quick overview now that we know exactly, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get into the details. So we have this really cool home screen. This is going to let us quickly and easily go to each and every aspect. We have an admin screen that we're going to be going over in detail on this. We also have a dashboard, as you saw here, and then what we have is the inventory. You're going to be able to add, edit, update inventory, add pictures, and do all that kind of stuff on the inventory. Now our order screen, we can create multiple different orders. As you saw, we can create estimates, work orders, we can create invoices, we can create purchase orders, and all of that. Each one of them will look different. Each one of them are fully customizable. We'll be getting into all of that. And of course, we also have transactions, right? We're going to be able to create multiple transactions. We're going to be able to search for those transactions either by a specific account, or we can search by a particular amount if we want to, or we can search by a name, right? We have that available as well. So there's a lot to choose from here, and there's a lot to show you on. This is really incredible accounting application. Has everything inside that you need to cover your basic accounting. And I'm going to show you every step. So that way, not only will you have a template, but you'll be able to customize this and create it on your own and be very successful at it. So we've got these transactions, inventory, and orders. All right. So that's basically, it'll tie it up with an admin screen. And then of course the dashboard, which you have seen, along with the date range. All right. So what we're going to do is let's start out with the admin screen. We're going to go over what's inside the admin screen and why that's important to you. Now, any good application, right? Every business, everybody runs their business slightly differently. They have different names. They call work orders different. So like, for example, estimates. Maybe we want to call estimates, maybe we want to call them proposals, right? So what we want to have is create a dynamic application in which they can change their own words and then have that vocabulary used throughout the application. So if I call, and instead of an estimate, I call it proposal, because that's what we're used to in the company that I'm working for, then it is that new vocabulary that gets used throughout the application. So now we have proposal up here. We have proposal status, we have add new proposal, we have copy to proposal. So it's automatically added throughout the application. So the application is fully dynamic. Whatever you change inside the application right here in the admin and settings screen, that's going to be changed throughout the application. So we have a lot of dynamic vocabulary here, including invoices and purchase orders. So whatever you call them, and here's just some ideas of what you might want to call it. Work orders could be called work requests, invoices, receipts, bills, or orders, purchase orders, or purchase or POs, whatever you want to call them. And the same thing with our customers. If we want to call them clients or customers or vendors or guests or whatever we want to call them, we can simply change it here, and they're going to be changed throughout the application automatically. And it's also going to update the database as well, and we're going to show you how to do that so that when we make changes, it gets updated throughout the application. Very, very helpful naming, especially when we use other languages too. Also, moving down, we have accounting here. When we create transactions, we want to create both income and expense types transactions. Expense type can be cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold are those type of expenses in which are directly related to the work that you perform. So if we're sending technicians out and they're doing some repairs and they bring some products with you, the hours that they perform along with the products that they use are all cost of goods sold. Those expenses are considered cost of goods sold. While other expenses such as lease, utilities, or meals, entertainment, something that cannot be related directly to the work or products being created, those are called other expenses. And that's going to really help us when we create that profit and loss inside the dashboard. We want to show income, cost of goods sold. Of course, we've got a net loss in this one. Gross profit and other expenses, we want them showed those expenses, cost of goods sold, and other expenses shown separately. So having those two different types of expense accounts are really going to help us detail down into the types of expense a company can have. And of course, we can create as many expenses as we want. Okay, also now we take a look up here, we have status. Now each individual orders can have status. In other words, this is fully customizable. An estimate can be pending, completed, sent, while a work order can have its own statuses invoices can have their own statuses, and purchase orders can have their own statuses. Now let me take a look and show you what we mean by that. I've got to add a home button onto this. I think that's kind of important. So let's go ahead and do that now. So let's take a look at this. I've got a home button that's going to allow us to do that. Admin screen needs one too. I thought we put it there. Okay, so we got one for the admin. Let's put it a home button, and you see these are going to automatically go to them. I'm going to show you how to create that. Okay, so inside our order management, if I have a status here, if we say proposal status, so let's go ahead and add a new estimate or work order or proposal or anything like that. What we want to do then here, there we go, an estimate, the way we had it before. Estimates can have certain statuses: pending, completed, sent, pending approval, approval, or denied, right? Those are fully customizable statuses. While work orders here can also have their own statuses: assigned, unassigned, right? So you can see how the status, the drop-down list, the dynamic are completely customizable: pending, unpaid, and of course, lastly, the purchase orders can have their own status, right? So here, ordered, pending, shipped, received, right? So you see the same cell can have dynamic drop-down lists. I'll be showing you how to create that. And that's all going to be based on what we set up in here. And also what we want to do is when we want to have a setup, right? We want to have a default. So if we want to know an estimate, if we want to set brand new estimates, we can have this sent as a default. And maybe we want our work orders to automatically be assigned. That is the default status when we create new estimates or new work orders. So when we go back into the order management and I decide I want to create a brand new estimate, we see that the estimate status has automatically been sent. This set is the default. And we create a brand new work order, we also see that we have a work order status as assigned. Those are completely customizable from our admin screen right here, right? So we have our default settings, and that means for brand new orders. So invoice, estimates, work orders. So everything is fully customizable and setting dynamic. I'm going to show you how to do that, creating this dynamic. Not only do we have a dynamic data validation based on the type of order that was created, but we also have the dynamic default, so we can set the defaults with a single check. So we've got a lot going on there. I also want to count defaults, right? When we create an invoice, what income account, notice we have a list of income accounts, what income account is going to get affected? I want to know the income account so that we can automatically mark those invoices when we create an invoice. Likewise, when I create a purchase order and I'm purchase materials, I want to know what is the default expense account. And why is that important? When we go into, let's say we go into invoices, I want to set a default invoice account, that default income account. Now we can change it on individual invoices, but I want to know the default income account associated with this invoice. So when I create those invoices very easily, it is that particular income account that is going to get credited. Likewise, when we create a brand new purchase order, I want to set a specific actually this purchase account, this should be invoice account. Income, this should be expense account. I'll update that. Shouldn't be invoice account. It can be expense account, but we want to make sure that this is dynamic. So I'm going to make that update. In other words, I want to show expense accounts if it is purchase order or if it is. So let's go ahead and show you how we're going to do that. So we're going to do equals if, right? And I want to know if our order type, and I'll show you what the order type is. The order type is very specific to whatever order type are we on. It's a named range equals. And I want to know if it's going to be the invoice type, invoice order. So this is going to be, if it's an invoice order, I want to show this as an income account. Otherwise, if it's a purchase, the only two particular orders that we're going to use this for are purchase orders and invoice. And then it's going to be expense account. And we're going to show you what those types are and the name ranges. We'll go over it. And that's it. That's all we need to do. So that way, automatically, this is showing expense account for purchase orders. And then anytime we load a brand new invoice, it's automatically going to show income account. Okay, great. Now, just keep in mind, we'll be showing over that order type is right here called invoice. As we add a new one, right, it's going to change. So keep in mind that this purchase order here, if we take a look at this, this is order type. So this particular cell is the named range that we're using. Okay. Now back inside the admin, let's continue going over. We looked over here, but we've got some named ranges here. This is called the estimate order. We're going to be using named ranges throughout the application. We'll be going over them every little bit, but this is called the estimate order. This is called the work order. This is called the invoice order. We just use this one inside our formula, invoice order. And lastly, we have purchase order, right? So those are the named ranges that we're going to be using. Also, I have customer name. I have the vendor name. I have the employee name. Yes, we'll be adding employees, items, and customers and vendors. God, I didn't even show you that. My goodness, right? When we add a brand new one, we can add a customer, vendor, or employee. So we can do that. Whoops, forgot to show you that. Well, now you know. See, there's a little secrets. Keep in mind that purchases are going to have a list of vendors, while invoices are going to have a list of customers, right? So this is going to change the customer. We have a dynamic list of customers, right? We have a dynamic list of employees. However, all of them, or any one of them, can be added here. If I select a specific customer here, we may want to edit that customer. We can do that through here. We're going to be getting into detail on that. Let's continue with our just because I forgot to show you that. So we've got customers, vendors, employees, and items. Each one of them have individual names. This will help refer to them inside our, of course, formulas and help us also inside the code. So we went over pending status. Now, account defaults, we understand the transfer account. I'll probably set this up. This is going to be a default. So when we create a brand new transfer, I just didn't get to that, but I probably should. If I create a brand new transfer, here's a transaction. It should be transactions. And I create a new transaction. Do we want to set a default account? What account do we want to set default is? If I were to copy this here, and then go into the admin screen, and I paste that, it should say transaction account. And I paste that entirely there, and I call this transaction account. Let's do this abbreviated, right? I want to set a default one, and we'll transaction account. So I want to set, maybe we want to leave it blank, but maybe we have a continuing, maybe we purchase a lot of meals and entertainment. So we want this as our default account, and we have other spaces here we can add to that. So maybe we want to do that to the transaction account. So that way, when we create new ones, and I'll program this in with you, of course, when we create brand new transactions, it is that account that I also want to set here in the add new and J. So we're going to have transactions. So that's very cool. So we've got some default accounts set up. This is used for invoices. This is used for purchases. And keep in mind that if I invoice income, purchase expense, and transfer. Okay, we also have tax details. All right, I want to know the sales tax, both when we create invoices, we're going to create a sales tax, but maybe there's a chance that when our customers, when we purchase on a purchase order, our tax rate could be different. So let's say we have a sales tax of 10%. I'm not sure why they would be different, but and a purchase tax rate of 5%, we may want to call them something differently. Therefore, when we go back to the order screen, if I go to let's go to a purchase order here. Let's say 3 is a purchase order, right? So if I've got a purchase order here, I know our purchase tax is 5%. However, if I create an invoice here, 8 is an invoice. So in invoice, I want a sales tax at 10%. So notice that the tax can also be dynamic based on whether it's an invoice or based on whether it is a purchase order. So those are the two transactional types of orders. Estimates and work orders do not have any type of transactional. Therefore, when you see an estimate, right, there is no account. When you see a work order, there is no account assigned because only invoices and purchase orders have account related. So only they can have payments on them, and only they can have expense accounts or income accounts. Okay, so moving on. So we've got the accounts. Now we also want to set some terms, right? If I know that we create invoices or pay bills based on net 30 or net 15, when I create a new invoice or a new purchase order, I want that default set up so that we can automatically set the payment due date, right? So that means, right, if I create a brand new order here and I want a new invoice and I want to set that default at net 30, I know that as soon as I decided, let's say I decide to change this to 6/5, I want to make sure that our due date is automatically based on net 30. If I decide to change these terms to net 60, that due date's automatically going to update, right? And it's going to be the same for purchase orders. If I create a brand new purchase order, I also want that automatically due date, probably set it automatically when I create a new one, based on assuming that there is a purchase order date and assuming that there is a payment date, the due date should be set automatically. But of course, it can change, right? And that means you have 15 days to pay that bill, and I want that due date automatically set based on the purchase date. So that's why, and of course, we can set a default, right? That default is going to be for when I create a brand new invoice. What payment term do I set as default here? If I were to go back into the admin screen and change that to net 15, any new purchases or any new invoices would automatically get that net 15 here. So we're going to set that as a default. That makes things a lot easier for us. A date range, this is very helpful. This will be used in our dashboard. When we create a date range, whatever date ranges we have, this is what we want to be reflected inside our dashboard. So we go inside our dashboard and I change this to this month, right? I want our data to automatically be reflected, and I want our from and to dates to automatically show that. If I change it back to this year, again, I want that from and to date automatically updated based on the date range. Now that date range is basically set up directly inside here. So we can set up those dates here. So we're going to be setting up, and we just basically set them up on basic formulas from the year of today. If we want to set up, for example, from the beginning of this month, we would just use the date formula from today, the year of the current year, of course, the current month, and of course, 1, setting that first. And then we use the same formula, except we wrap it around EO month. And that's going to be the end of the month, meaning the current month. So we've got some formulas here. You can take a look at them. We won't be going over too much detail on the formula. They're pretty standard. Okay, this is really, really important. We've got an accounting basis. Now, some businesses consider income created when they create an invoice or when they create a bill. However, other companies use accrual-based accounting, use cash basis, and they assume that income is only when they get paid or when they actually pay, when the cash leaves their pocket, right? Or when the cash comes into their pocket. That is a cash base. And we should be able to do both of these, right? So we just simply select this option, and that's going to affect our profit and loss. And I'm going to show you how that does it. So we go into the dashboard, right? We're going to see that that's going to be affecting. So if we refresh this, you see our income automatically changed, right? Look at that. The income completely changed based on the accounting basis. Now, this is really important. Cash basis accounting means that it is income only when you get the money. It is expense only when you actually pay the money. Whereas accrual-based accounting, it is income as soon as you create the invoice or as soon as you create the bill. Now, personally, I kind of like cash because we know that when we create bills, when we create invoices, customers don't always pay 100%, and they always don't pay on time. So I personally like cash basis, but of course it's whatever your company is used to, whatever you're used to, and or whatever your rules are. Sometimes government has specific rules on which you can use, but both are available inside this application, which is kind of really helpful. Also, we have item picture folder. As you saw here inside the dashboard, our items, our inventory items have those pictures, right? Those are located inside our items database here. We've got a database of items, basic information, item ID, inventory type, sales purchase description, work or service order description. That means when we make a sale or an estimate, there's a specific description for items. When we make a purchase, there's a different description. Or when we create a work or you want to send our staff on a specific work order, we have another description. We have a minimum quantity for a product, a sales price, and a purchase cost, and a picture associated. Now, the picture associated are based on a folder, and that folder location is right here. So I've mapped that specific folder location right to here. When you get this file, of course, you can map your own. And if you want all of my pictures and icons and all the other resources, our Patreon platform will have all of those resources. Make sure you join our Patreon. I've got that link down below. We've got brand new updated videos, updated templates each and every week, along with a ton of other benefits. So I hope you'll join us. So we can browse for a picture folder, whatever picture folder we want, and we could just place that in there. Okay, also, again, we also have dynamic footer messages. And this is really cool. Now, what is a footer message? A footer message is a message that shows down here, thank you for your business, right? We can set different ones if we want to. We can set we have a list of footer message, maybe 30 days, right? So estimate is good for 30 days. So what we can do is create multiple footer message. As we change our footer message here, it's going to change down below. However, we want to set up some default footer messages. So that means when I create a brand new estimate, I want to set that footer message as 30-day message, and it means this estimate is good for 30 days on the estimated date. Or perhaps when I create a brand new work order, I want to set a footer message of cleanup, letting our employees know, please make sure to clean up the entire work area before leaving. And of course, likewise, when I create an invoice, I want to thank the customer. And when I create a purchase order, I want to know about letting the driver know, deliver all packages back to her. So we can create any number of footer messages, and we want to have those footer messages and set those defaults here. So that includes a message name and along with the message text. But what I want to do is I want to set the default on a per order basis. That means our estimates are going to show this. If I want to change our estimates so that our estimates could show delivery times, I don't know why we'd want to do that, we can set the default here. So then if I create a brand new estimate, and it's going to show that default. So let's go ahead and here, estimate here, and create a brand new estimate here. It's going to show delivery times and then delivery times. So the default is automatically set on this. As I said, this is a massive application. So we'll go ahead and reset that default. So I want to be able to set that default. I want to set the default work order, footer message, the invoice, and the purchase order. All should have default estimates. That's really good. I believe we've covered everything in the admin screen to the most detail. I've got a few named ranges that I just want to bring to your attention that are coming from the admin screen. So we're going to go into the formulas and we're going to go in the name manager and we're going to see accounts expenses, right? So we've got a dynamic named range based on the account expenses. It's going to be based on all of those expense accounts. We also have one, let's bring this over here. We also have one called income, right? Based on our income accounts. And I also have accounts expense type, right? I have another name range for expense type. So this way, when I look up a specific expense, I can easily use index and find out what type of it is. Is it a cost of goods sold or is it an expense? So that's going to be helpful in a formula. So we have expense types. And I also have all accounts sorted. Now this is going to be a sorted account that we can have all the accounts sorted. And that's going to be located on our transactions. Let's go ahead and go to that so I can show you that. And that's going to be coming directly from the transactions here. So if I move over here, let's unhide columns A and B so you can see a list of those. Our transactions uses all accounts, right? We can have both income and expense accounts inside this account. So what I want is a unique list of all the accounts. So here's a unique list of all the accounts called unique accounts. So we can create those automatically, and I'll show you how to do that. So that's going to be all accounts. All right, great. So we've gone over some of the named ranges inside here. We also have some dynamic named ranges for our order status. That's going to really help us out inside our VBA code so we can quickly get to the right automated status for each based on a form along with the default status. So inside our formula and name manager, and we see status here, we have one called status estimate here, and we have a dynamic range called invoice here. So we move over here, and we have one called status, let's take a look at work order here, right, which is over here. And we have one more, of course, called status purchase orders. And we also have one for the default. So you see status purchase order right here. And I also have one for the default. I want to create one for each one of the defaults. So that's going to also help us. So if we take a look inside here, we see, moving over here, we have one for the default. I've got a named range for the default. It's called status default estimate, and another one for invoice, and another one for purchase order and merge. So each one of these has its own named range. So we have one for the status and one for the default status. Okay, so that's going to easily allow us to locate which one is set default when we create those brand new estimates, work orders, invoices, or purchase orders. Keep that in mind that also I've estimated this as C5, right? Of course, this is also, I've also created a named range so we can do estimate order. That works as well because we've created a named range for those. Same thing with work order. I like to use these in formulas. So instead of using a specific cell, we see it. And that way, when we make a change to work, right? If I were going to change this to work request, you would see that that would automatically change here up in there. So that's kind of nice. I like that, to have that kind of dynamic ability there inside there. So using those forms. And the same thing for invoice here. I've done invoice orders. We can just quickly find it, invoice order. And lastly, purchase orders. So we can see how these name ranges of purchase order. Oops, I didn't do that. That should be purchase order. Okay, so we can see how using these named ranges here, fully customizable vocabulary throughout the application, and then we can just use that. So we see inside the formulas using the named range, we know exactly what it is. Great, so that's kind of a rundown of our admin screen. We can kind of see just about everything else, and we've got this. I've also got a named range called item picture folder here for that. So in case we have a named range for footer messages, let's just quickly go over that because that's going to come up. So we'll take a look inside footer message. I have one for the name, and I have another one for the text. So we've got two footer messages, and I'll remind you these as we go because there's a lot of named ranges, but one for the footer message name and one for the text. So we've got two of those. Okay, very, very good. Let's go ahead and take a look inside some of the database so I can just familiarize yourself with all the data. The first thing we have is our orders database, right? This tracks all of our main order. We have order ID, the type of order it is. As you know, we have 4 different types of work orders. The order date, assigned, what is the status of that? Remember, we have dynamic statuses. The name associated, generally it's going to be a customer or vendor name, right? Vendors for purchases, customers for estimates and invoices and probably work orders. And then we have an employee list. Now the employee, of course, comes directly from here, right here, so we can assign an employee to any type. We also are going to have the terms, right? The due date. Of course, work orders wouldn't have a term. Estimates generally wouldn't have a term, but invoices and purchase orders would have terms, and along with the due date. Our footer message name, the name of the footer message, so we recreated. If there's been a payment, invoices and purchase orders would have payments, whereas work orders and estimates would not. Again, invoices and purchase orders would have accounts, while estimates and work orders would not have an account associated with that. What is the total amount of that? We can have that total amount. Work orders generally wouldn't have total amounts, but estimates, invoices, and purchase orders would have it. And then we have a balance here. What is the balance based on the number of payments along with the total, right? So we have that, and that's going to come from a formula here. I like to create these dynamically so that we create a formula, and I'm going to create basically the total amount minus any payments. That's our formula, which is L. Then when I run some reports, I'll just bring down that formula, okay? Now we have order items database. If we take a look inside an order, any one order, we have items associated with an order, right? So for example, I've got 3 items associated with this. Inside this purchase order, we've got items, description, quantity, price, and total. I've got to store all that information somewhere. And so where are we going to be storing that? Well, that's going to come in the order items database. And the order items database is going to store, we certainly need an order ID. Notice order number 1 has 3 of these items. It's a work order. We've got the order date, the assigned. If there's an account, that could help us. Work orders wouldn't have accounts associated. The item name, the description of it, along with the quantity, the amount. This wouldn't necessarily come for work orders, but it could be helpful in the future. And a row that's associated. This is the order, right? It's on row number 10, row number 11, or row number 12. So I want to know row, so that way when I bring it back in, we know exactly what row it was on before. And we also want to know the existing row, the database row. This is very important. The database row 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to use a formula for that. Formulas are important because if I delete one row, the formulas will automatically update. So we want to use formulas there. I also have the item database, right? We saw that we have item information. Well, that's all got to be stored somewhere. So we have that inside the item database. And it's going to start with an item ID, the item name, the inventory, right? We can have both inventory and non-inventory parts. Hourly service work would be a non-inventory part, meaning we don't want to stock inventory. It's just a service item. So we don't stock inventory for those types, but other types inventory we do. Our sales or estimate description, along with a purchase description and the work or service description. We saw that before. We have a minimum quantity, the sales price, the purchase cost, and the picture. We went over that already. The transaction database is very simple, right? Those are all going to come from these transactions, right? And that's going to come right here. We have a transaction ID, the date of the transaction, the account type, what name was on it, a vendor name, customer name, or employee name, the account that's associated, the amount, and a memo, and the names database. Now this is really cool because we can store customers, vendors, employees, all within a single database as long as we know the type of it. So we have the name ID, the name, the address, city, state, zip, phone, email, and a status, right? That's all going to be very helpful. And we're going over that. Okay, great. And of course, names, as mentioned before, we can quickly edit or update names using these, right? If we want to add a new one, right, we can just clear this out, delete this, and we can add a brand new name here if we want to add a new name. We can create a customer, a vendor, or employee, and we can create a status by adding all of that. We'll be getting into that. Okay, so that's it. The database really is just made up of 5 different databases. Again, orders, order items, items database, transactions, and names database. So it's very, very simple on these 4. I've kept this very clean, and while it is robust, it is very, very simple to keep it nice and clean. So we've covered the admin. We know what's up. We've covered the database. Now let's go ahead and take a look at some of the simpler screens. Let's go ahead and go inside the item screen. The item screen is basically this. We've created a brand new items screen, and what I want to do is be able to simply select an item and then have that item load. I may also want to load it up automatically, or I may just want to start typing in that name and have that name come up. So if I want to type in Dawn, right, I want that to come up automatically. Now, how do we do that? That's called autocomplete. Now, autocomplete's a great feature and it's very, very helpful. So if I type in, let's say, Jacob's Coffee here, JAC, it's going to automatically come up. However, for something that has like coffee beans, let's take a look at this. Coffee beans Lavazza or coffee beans crema, it's going to take a little bit more because those names are very simpler. So I can type in COF coffee beans and nothing's going to come up. But as soon as I type in something that's unique, it's going to come up. How do we do this? Well, to use autocomplete, what we want to do is we want to have the list of items in the same column. Now, if you take a look at this, you don't see it here, right? It's here though, but what we're doing is we're hiding it. It's actually right here. Let's take a look at this. You see the formula right here? That is actually hidden. So I do have a list linked to items. Let's take a look at this items DB-N3. What is that? Well, inside our items database, what I do is I have a list of sorted items. And inside here is called sorted item names. When I create a brand new item, we're going to automatically update this list and make sure that they're sorted. Now, to get this list, what I want to do is I want to take this list and I want to create links. So that means any updates to this list is automatically going to link. So what I've done here, if I go down all the way, let's say to about right here, holding Shift Control, and then I set a format. I'm going to go into the, let's say, home here, and notice that there's a custom format. If I change this to a general format, you're going to see them all here. So we see we have the names here. That's great, but it doesn't necessarily work. Let's, I'm going to clear this something out. I'm going to delete what's here because it's going to be called. So now if I type it and nothing's going to work, let's type in DON. Notice it didn't work, right? Why didn't it work now? Because I deleted something very, very important. Okay, what we have here is called, I went over at a specific training called Don't Break the Chain, right? There's actually has to be a link, a chain link between these cells that link with data. Now that data can be any type of data, even spaces. So if I added, I'll add an X here. And if I want to add an X, you can use spaces, but I'll use X so you can actually see it, right? And I'm going to paste those values in here. And then I'm going to paste the value in here. We've now created a chain. If you take a look at this, linking of full text these cells. Now it doesn't have to be the same. So now when I type in DON, notice it comes up automatically, right? So again, ES, let's do something, espresso coffee. So notice, but if there's a break in the chain, right? If there's a break in this chain, if I delete that and that chain gets broken, it will not come up, right? So notice it didn't come up. As soon as we fill that chain in with values, any value at all, it will come up. So that's called don't break the chain. Now those, of course, we don't want to see all these X's. We can also use spaces. So I'll use 2 spaces, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste this down here, paste those values here, and I'm going to paste the values here. So now we've replaced it with spaces. And now let's check to see if it works. It still works great, right? So that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And also you can do this. You can do, let's say ES, or let's just do E, okay? And then I'm going to hold the Alt down arrow, and that's going to help us also quickly get to where we want to go using what we want. So using Alt down arrow also helps too if you want to quickly find out where you are. So that's really cool. So we have that available to us. So I really like that. And it's called Don't Break the Chain. Now we see, but we don't really want this ugly text here. We really want it hidden, right? We don't want to see those. So I'm going to hold the Shift and go all the way down to the bottom. And I've got about 1,000 that we're using, right? So 1,000. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to format this. I'm going to go to the home. And I'm going to give it a custom format. I'm going to go into more number formats. And then I'm going to go to custom here. And I'm going to use 3 semicolons. 3, 1, 2, 3, 3 semicolons. That will automatically hide it, everything. So now we have autocomplete. That's working just great. However, we don't see the spaces, we don't see that chain, and we don't see the links, but it's all there. So that's how we use autocomplete. Very, very powerful, especially when we need to load. We have a large list, and we want to be able to automatically set those and quickly create it without having to scroll down a large list. And keep in mind, if you have a row of thousands, right, it's going to take a little bit longer to load that list. So keep that in mind, that the lower down on the list you go, the little bit longer it's going to take. Keep that in mind. So if you click on a cell, it doesn't come up automatically. Lists with thousands take a little bit of time depending upon the speed of your computer. Okay, great. So we learned how to do autocomplete. Now you see as I change it, it's going to load these up. How do we quickly load this information up? Of course, that's going to be in VBA. We'll be able to add a new item, add a new picture if we want to browse for a picture, clearing the picture. We can do a lot of that. So how are we going to do that? I don't need to say this. Let's go ahead and, okay, so it's going to come up, saving an item, deleting an item. That's going to, of course, all be inside. So we've got a few macros to go to inside VBA. If you wanted to learn how to get into VBA, we can go into, of course, developer. If you don't have this developer open, we can display actually go into the options here and then just go into the customize ribbon and make sure that you've selected a developer. If you are new to VBA, I have a great course available to you. Actually, not one of mine, one of my friends, Daniel Strong. He's got the Ultimate VBA course, an incredible course from beginning to end. I don't teach basic VBA too much, but if you do want it, that is a great course, and that'll get you up to speed. So I'll include the link down below. Excel for Freelancers followers get at least 20% discount, so make sure you jump on that. Great, so we have this. Let's go into the item macros. Now what I've got is several modules here. We're going to focus on the items. That's the first one I want to do. I want to dimension some variables: item row, the item column, last row, last results row, the result row. Those are all long variables. We're going to be viewing pictures, so we need a picture folder and we need a picture path. And we need the item picture as a file dialog because we're going to have to browse for that item picture. Okay, the first macro that we're going to go over is the item new. That is the macro that runs every time we click this button. All we're going to do is clear out the associated cells. And of course, we have a few hidden columns here, and that's going to help us for the admin. So I'm going to unhide these, and it's going to display column A and B. Now the item ID right here, this is the selected item. So if I type in an item here, I want to show the item ID associated with that. I also want to know what row it's on. I've got a named range called item ID. If we go into the formulas and the name manager, we take a look at item ID. We have a dynamic named range based on all those item IDs. So you can see the last one's 30. Okay, so that's item. I also have another one called item name here. And I have another one called item sorted, right? Remember, we had that sorted list. I've got a named range based on that sorted list. So that we want to use because it is that sorted list that I want users to select from. So I want both lists. I want item name, which is unsorted, which is part of our original data here. And I want the sorted list, which is VBA is going to take care of and sort it for us automatically and show it up here. So we got two named ranges for that. Okay, great. So inside that, what I want to do is I want to associate the item row. I want to know that item number 21 is on row 24. Now keep in mind that inside our items database, our first one starts on row 4, right? Our first one starts on row 4. So I want to know that item number 21 is located on row 24. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use the match formula, and we're going to match whatever's in B3. That's the item ID. And I want to know an exact match, and I want to add 3 because our first one starts on row 4. If there's an error, we're just going to show empty. An error would be perhaps if we click a new item, then we want to make sure it shows empty so we know that there's no item associated. I also want to know the next item ID. If you've seen my videos before, we use it almost in every single video. Our next item ID is going to be based on all the item IDs. We're going to use the max formula. It's going to get us the largest number, and then we're going to add 1. So in that case, it would be 31 because we have 30 altogether. I want to know the selected item ID. When I select an item here, I want to know what ID is here. Notice it flashed very, very quickly here. Take a look at it again here, located in B6. We see that 21 flashed real quick. As soon as I know that we have a ID associated with this item, I'm going to place that ID directly in B3. And I also want to know the picture, right? When I load up an item, I want to know the name of the picture that's associated. And this one is called here. Let's say we expand this column. It's called Don Francisco's Coffee PNG. That is the same name that's going to come. So when I add a new picture, that name is going to be changed right here. Great. So also what I want to know is I want to understand the minimum quantity, the sales price, and the purchase price. So we have all that. So inside our new, all we're going to do is just simply clear out all the associated fields. I also want to make sure to clear out the selected ID located in B3. So that's what we're going to do here, B3. And then we're just going to clear out the remaining of the cells, clearing those out. And also, if there's a picture associated, this picture is always going to have the name of item pick here. I want to make sure that we automatically clear that out. I don't know why it's showing pick folder, it's just item pick. Okay, I want to make sure that item pick is automatically deleted there. Okay, so that's very important. And if there's no picture, it would create an error. So therefore, we've wrapped it in on error, resume next, and on error, go to 0. Then I'm going to select E5. We're selecting E5 because that is the first one we want the user to enter that brand new item. So they can enter a brand new item here. So test item, right? We'll give it an item type. We can give it a brand new item type like inventory and non-inventory. We can give it a test invoice description. And we can also give it a purchase description, test purchase description, and of course work order, service description here. We can give it a minimum quantity when we may place an order, right? I want to maybe have that minimum quantity. I don't want to have any stock under 10. If our stock goes under 10, I want to know about it. We can set a sales price here. And we can set a purchase price here. So we can do that automatically. And automatically based on the purchases, I'll go over this formula a little bit later on, I want to know the quantity on hand. And basically, in basic format, is all the items that we've purchased minus all the items that we have sold. And that is going to be the quantity on hand. I also want to be able to add a picture. If I'm going to add a picture, we can use this Invoice with Profit, which is a great training. So we can quickly add a picture here. The picture name I want displayed directly inside here. And then we can simply save and update that. And that's going to save that. We'll have a fade out message that lets us know that the item was saved and now it is saved. So that is, you saw the macro just run called item save and update. When I click that button, it saved the item. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing what we want to do is I want to make sure that the user has put in an item name and type. I do have some required fields. Item name and item type are very important and required. If the user leaves those blank, we'll let the user know to make sure to add those before saving, and we're going to exit the sub out. I also need to determine, is it a new item or is it an existing item, right? If we go into this item, we load this, we know it's an existing item. If we click a new item, then we know, how do we know that? B4 is going to be blank for new items, where B4 is going to have a row associated if it's for an existing item. So B4 is going to be our differentiator, and we can use that. If B4 equals empty, we know it is a brand new item. There are a few things that we need to do for new items, and there's one thing we need to do for existing items. So for new items, I want to determine the item row, and that is the item row that's going to be the first available one inside our item database. So the next row here is going to be 35, right? And we also know that we need to get a new item ID for that, which would be 32. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pulling that item ID directly from here, B5. I'm going to place this directly inside B3, and I'm going to set that row up. That's what we're going to be doing for those new items. So the item row is going to be the first available row inside the item database, and we have a new database plus one that's going to get us our new database row. And our item ID, we're going to take whatever's in B5. This is that located inside here. That's going to set our next item ID. I'm going to place that in B3. Right here. I also want to take that item ID and I want to place it directly inside column A. So I want to place it right here, just like you saw we put in this 31. I want to make sure that we're going to place it also in column A so that they get placed there. So 32 would get placed here. So that's it for our new. For an existing item, all we need to do is extract the item row from B4. Everything else is going to be the same. And now we're going to use data mapping. Now, if you haven't seen data mapping, all we're going to be doing is simply we want to map this column, item name or item type or sales description with a specific cell inside our item screen here. So if we notice this item name is located in E5 and we notice our item type is located in H5, I want to map those cells directly with the associated columns. So we see that item name is E5 and we see the item type is H5. So these are mapped. So all I need to do then is loop from 2, because A is already in there, from 2 all the way to the last column. And that last column is column 10, right? I believe column 10 here. So we can loop it all the way, column 10 to, which is this case, we're going to loop it all the way to column J, right? B7, of course, is the mapped one. That's our picture. Our picture is located right here inside B7 here. So we're going to map it all, and we can do that with a for next loop. For the item column equals 2. Column 1 has already been done here, right? Already been done here. 2 to 10. And what we're going to do is we're going to update that. So I'm going to take that item database, that specific item row or that item column. The value there is simply going to be equal what is ever in the range. Where's that range located? It's located in that first row of the items database. We're going to save and update that. So we're going to just loop through that, taking basically any data that's here, 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 or here, and placing it in the associated row inside our table, here, here, here. So just creating that and or updating that automatically inside that. Okay, once we have that, that's it. All we're going to do is I want to run a macro that's automatically going to resort those names or add that name. That macro we're going to cover next. And I want to run a fade out message. This simple fade out message is just going to show this fade out message, so it automatically goes, letting the user know that the item has been saved and fading it out. So as far as the sorting names list, right, if I want to sort that, that's very, very important, right? So if I change this from Don Francisco's Coffee to, let's say, Fred Francisco's, because I love Fred's a great guy. Fred Francisco's Coffee, maybe Fred bottom out, right? And I want to save and update that name. I want to make sure that Fred is automatically, if I type in F, right? I want to make sure that Fred is automatically in here. How do we know that? How do we know it's going to be automatically in that updated list? Well, we can simply take a look inside our drop-down list here and scroll down here, and we see that we take a look inside Fred Francisco's Coffee. Notice that it's automatically been automatically updated, right? So if I type that in here, it's It's automatically updated. If I type it in here, Fred Francisco's coffee, it's going to show up, and no longer Dawn is no longer available, right? So it automatically updated in that. And if we take a look inside our items database here, we see that Fred Francisco's coffee has now been updated and it's alphabetically sorted. That is going to be for the next macro we're going to cover. It's called updated sorted names, and it runs every time we save or delete a particular item. So what we're going to do is we're going to determine the last row, focusing on the items database. We're going to determine the last row, and I want to clear any existing. So whatever existing all the way from N3 and down, I want to delete everything there. So we're going to clear the contents out using this line of code. And then what we want to do is we want to bring over all of the names. So I'm just simply going to take all the names located right here between from B4 all the way down to the last one, so B34. And I'm just simply going to copy them over right here inside column N. Once they've been placed, that we're going to do that right here. So N and the last row minus 1 equals B in the last row. Why are we minusing 1? Why is there a differentiator on that? Because our first one starts on 3 while our first one here starts on 4. So we need to differentiate between that. Okay, great. So then what we're going to do is just going to run a sort. So the first thing we're going to do is clear any sort fields. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set a specific key. Now that key is going to be based on that first value, which is N3. I want it ascending, alphabetical, A to Z. Sort normal, and then we're just going to set that range. Make sure you reset the items database here and here, resetting that sheet name because we're inside another with sort. We're no longer inside here. So we're going to set that range to end in the last row, and then we're just going to apply that filter, and that automatically applies the filter and sorts it alphabetically. The named range automatically takes care of it. Remember, we have here inside our items, we have a sorted named range. It is that same names that we're using inside the data validation. All right, so we see when we click data validation here inside the advanced here, we're going to see that we have item name sorted. So it is this item named range that we're using inside that drop-down list. So that's the one we want to select. Okay, very good. So now we've covered that. And now I want to show this fade out message. This is relatively simple. We use this throughout the application. I'm going to take a particular shape. That shape is called item saved messages. This shape, if we select on all the shapes, and we see all of our shape, we see that item saved message is hidden. If I were to make it visible, we see that we have a shape called item saved message. It is this shape that's going to be slowly faded out to letting the user know. All we're going to be doing is running a loop from 1 to 100 and then slowly increasing that transparency. As we increase it, it becomes faded out. And then eventually we're simply going to hide it using visible false. That's it. That's all we have to do to save message. Great. So now we're also able to, as you saw, we're able to add a new picture, simply browsing for a new picture, just like that. That is going to be I don't think I like that. Clears. It probably should clear out the existing picture. Fred Francisco. So what we want to do is use add a picture. This particular button has been assigned to the macro. So if we assign a macro, we see that as the browse item pick. This is the macro that we're going to go over right now. First of all, again, as you just saw, we want to delete any associated picture when we're browsing for a new one. So we're item pick. Every time we create a brand new picture inside our items, it's always given the same name called item pick. And here we're simply going to delete it. If it doesn't exist, it could create an error. So we're wrapping it around on error zoom next and on error go to 0. I'm setting that picture folder. Remember inside our admin, we created a named range called item picture folder. Just to refresh your memory, this particular one is called item picture folder here. So this named range we're going to be using, we can use that inside brackets inside the code right here. So, and I also want to add a backslash to that, right? So the picture folder, we're setting that up. And I want to make sure if the picture folder equals just the backslash, or if there is an incorrect path, right, then let the user know to please set picture for the items. And how is that helpful? Well, it's helpful if I decide, let's say we have an incorrect path, let's add an S to this, and I try to browse for that. When we go back into the item screen and I decide to add a picture, I want to make sure that there's an incorrect path, please select a folder, right? So it's going to allow us to select that folder so we can quickly browse for that folder so we can set the correct picture, right? But of course we have it. I'm just going to make sure that, so that's what we have when we have an incorrect path. It helps us get to the correct path here. But once we do have a correct path, it'll go directly to that path. So this is what we'll do. So what it's going to do is you saw another macro. Please select a folder from the pictures. Browse for picture folder. This particular macro is located in our application macros here, and all we're going to be doing is just browse for the picture folder. All it does is browse picture file log, browse for the picture folder. That's in our application. We'll go over a few macros there as well. So back inside the item macro, so we're going to run that. Once we have it, we're going to check the picture folder equals the picture folder. We're going to run another check. If the picture folder just only equals the backslash, means they haven't added anything, or it's an incorrect path, we're going to exit the sub. So we're giving them another chance. And if it's still incorrect, we're just going to exit the sub out. Assuming that it is correct, we're going to set that full pathway, right? I want to set the item picture as the application file dialog file picker. We're giving the user the ability to pick a specific file. So we're going to use file picker. And then we can work with it. We're going to give it a title called please select an item picture. Users, we want them to use pictures, not any particular file. So we want to give it some filters. We're going to add a filter. We're going to give it a name called picture files. We're going to let the user select from JPG, PNG, GIF, JPEG, or GIF. Okay, well, these are kind of the same thing. So, and we're going to give them one. So we do not want them to select multiple, just one single picture. So allow multi-select equals false. If for some reason show is anything else other than -1s, that means they haven't selected anything. We're going to go to no selection, which is going to skip down here. If they have selected it, what I want to do is I want to see if I want to place any picture they have, I want to place it in a specific folder. I want to place all the pictures wherever they've browsed for it inside this particular folder, right? Because that way I know where to look for it. But what if it's already in that folder? If it's already in that folder, there's nothing to do. So I want to check, is it already in the folder? That means is the folder that is the full path they've selected here, that's where they have browsed, is it exactly the same as where we want to put it? If it is, then go to skip. We don't need to skip copy it in. So we're going to skip the copy and go down here. But what if it's not? What if it's not the same? Well, what I want to do is I want to check to see if there is another one with that same name. If it is, we're going to delete it. Otherwise, we're simply going to copy the picture inside the existing folder. So we're going to copy it from its current location, selected items, into its new location, picture folder, and the directory of the selected items. This right here, the directory of selected items, is simply the name of the picture with the extension. So we're taking the folder with the backslash, we're adding onto the string the name with the extension, and that is the full file path. So these together equal the full file path of the picture. We're simply copying it from its existing location into its new location and giving it a very specific name. And that's it. All we need to use is do file copy. Then what I want to do is I want to set the name. Remember that name is located directly in B7, but I only want the name. Remember the full name along with the extension. We're going to use directory for that, directory of the select items. It's going to place that file name directly in B7. Then we're going to run a macro called item show picture, right? So we're going to have that. It's going to come up right now, but there's another macro called clear picture. If I want to clear the picture, I can do that, right? Let's load in here. Let's load in that picture. Just all we need to do is load in Francisco's. Okay, loading that picture, clearing that picture is going to allow us to do that. We know the picture name, so all we need to do is just delete the item picture if it doesn't exist, right? We certainly don't want an error to come up if they click clear the picture, but there's no picture there. We don't want an error to come up, so that way we've wrapped it on error. And I also want to clear any files inside B7. Okay, but what I also want to show the picture. If I know that there's a specific path and I want to show that picture, how are we going to do that? Well, the best way to do that is I want to place it directly in the center. I want to size it accordingly, and I want to make sure it's in the center of column M. And I also want to make sure it's in the center between, let's say, 4 and 9, right? Or 4 and 10, something like that, right? I want to make sure it is centered. So we're going to display the pictures. The first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the picture if it's existing, right? If there's an existing picture there, I want to remove it. Next up, what I want to do is I want to check to make sure we have an accurate picture folder just like we did before. So we're simply going to run through the same exact checks that we did before, checking to make sure if it's not, letting the user know, browsing for the picture, checking one more time. If it's still inaccurate, we're going to exit the sub out. Setting that picture path, setting it into a file. That picture path is simply going to be the picture folder combined with whatever's in B7. And remember, B7 is the name and the extension. So this is the full file picture path. Then all we're going to be doing, I want to make another check to make sure that it is accurate. If the directory of the picture path, VB directory, doesn't equal empty, then we can go ahead and insert it, right? If it does equal empty, there's nothing we can do. We're going to insert the pictures. So we've already on the item sheet, we're already here. So dot items, dot pictures, dot insert. We're inserting that picture path and we're giving it a very specific name. That name is always going to be item pick. That way it makes it very easy to delete. Then what I want to do is I want to work with it. So with shapes, item picture, we're going to lock that aspect ratio so that way the doesn't get contorted when we on it. I want that aspect ratio to be maintained. So when we resize it, it doesn't change horizontal or vertical too much. What I want to do is I want to check if the width is greater than the height. I'm going to set the maximum width as 90. However, I'm going to set the maximum height as 80. That's going to set the width and the height. I want to also set the left position. It's going to be based on M4, right? M4 is our original cell. And I want to base it, this is going to be our upper left location and our top location. So, but I also want to add to that because I want to center it. So how do we center it? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the entire width of M column right here, and I'm going to subtract the width of the picture. The difference of that, I'm going to divide by 2. What that's going to do is going to put equal distance on both the left and the right of the picture. It's going to center it horizontally. I also want to center it vertically. We're going to do the same thing, but this time I'm going to take rows 4 through 10, and I'm going to determine the height of those rows. I'm going to subtract the height of the picture. Then what I'm going to do is going to take that difference and divide it by 2. That's going to center the picture vertically. Then I'm just going to make sure it's visible. It should automatically be visible. Automatically, when I insert it here, it should be visible, but just to make sure we're centering here. Okay, that's it. That's all we have to do. Now you notice another macro. Remember, all when we did here, when I decided that I'm going to enter a coffee here. So let's pick a espresso machine. Espresso coffee machine. I want to load that machine here. Can download that picture just a little bit. Sometimes it does that. It's a little bit, but it usually does it once and then it's fast, very fast, right? So if I do here, Francisco, and then I go back into here, see it's fast again. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to make sure that we have a correct item ID. Now, how do we know that? Well, we can use a formula for that. If there's a value here, a text here, what I want to do is I want to check. So I'm going to run an index because I want the item ID that's associated with whatever the user puts in. So how are we going to do that? Well, what I'm going to do is use an index match formula. I'm going to index the item ID. I'm going to use a match. That match is going to be based on whatever's in E3. And I'm going to base it on an item name and 0. I want a column. And that means what we're simply going to be doing is extracting the item ID based on whatever name that enters here. Notice it's blank. And if it's blank, there's an error. And if there's an error, it's going to be blank, which is fine. That's exactly what we want. However, if we decide to load it up, right, we're going to automatically load it. So if I pause the code here, and then I go ahead and I enter another comment here, enter that, you're going to see that, of course, it's paused, which is what we want. And now we see here, before it gets cleared out, we see that the selected item ID is 22. So what I want to do now is I know that's accurate because B6 contains a value. It's not an error. I know that the user has selected a correct item name. I'm going to take this item ID and I'm going to move it directly over to B3. Once we're done with that, we can clear this out. And once we clear what's out in E3, it's automatically going to clear out. We no longer need this. So that's all we're going to be doing. So notice E3 gets cleared out in the next line of code. As we run this, you see E3 gets cleared out. We're going to bring that ID directly inside B3. That will generate the item row, and then we're going to be able to load that item, also using data mapping. If there's an existing item picture, we're going to delete it. Of course, we have to clear the contents of all the cells associated with that. And also, I want to make sure that B4 contains a value. B4 is very critical because that is the row of the associated ID. If it is blank, then we have an incorrect one. We need to let the user know, please make sure to select a correct item. We're going to turn off application screen updating, making it false. That's going to help us move things along faster, make the code faster, but of course we have to turn it on before the macro ends without any exit subs. We're going to set that item row based on B4, and then we're going to simply run the reverse data mapping as we did before, but this time in reverse. This time we're going to pull information directly from the item database on the item row, on the item column. We're going to place it directly inside the range, and that range inside our item sheet is located directly here on row 1 in the item column as we loop through that, right? So it's going to take information from the items database, and it's going to place this picture in B7. It's going to place this amount, the cost inside K9, and so on and so forth as it loops from 2 to 10. So it's going to place all those values inside there accordingly. Okay, very, very good. So we've got that. So that's all we need to do. And then if B7 value doesn't equal empty, meaning we do have an item picture, we're going to run the macro show item picture. And that's the macro that I already went over up here. Okay, great. So that's it. And then, of course, before ending, we're going to turn application screen updating on back on to true. Item delete, relatively simple. When I want to delete an item, it's very easy. All I need to do is just do that. I want an option to come up. If I delete an item, I want to let the user know, are you sure you want to delete this item? That's the first thing. Are you sure you want to delete this item? Giving the user VB yes or no giving it a name called delete item. If it's no, we're just going to exit the sub as I just did. Then what I want to know if it has been saved or not. Why is that important? Because if I create a brand new item and I enter some name in here, right, and some type in here, and I decide I want to delete that, there's no row associated with that. So when I delete an item, all we're going to be doing is just clearing the contents. There's no row associated with that. So we can skip deleting any row. So we're going to go all the way to not save, which is going to go down here. It's going to delete any row. I mean, it's not going to delete any row because there's no database row associated with that because it has never been saved. However, if it has been saved and B4 does contain that row, then I want to put that into a variable called item row. And then inside the items database, item row and the item row, entire row delete. Lastly, for all that, whether it's been saved or not, we're going to run the macro item new. That's going to clear out all the fields. Then we're going to update the list. If I want to update the list, I want to make sure to run the macro that updates that list. And as you can see inside the database here, the items database here, we take a look inside that sorted list here. Let's take a look inside the item database. We see that sorted list, the last one that I added test item, right? That's already included. However, if I go into the items and I decide I'm going to delete this item and I add it in, and then I click delete and I do want to delete it, I want to make sure it's cleared out, right? And I also want to make sure that inside the items database that it is no longer here. So you see the last one is no longer here. And that's exactly what I want to happen. And so that's it. That's all we need to do for items. That covers everything on items. Okay, very good. Next up, I want to go inside the transactions. We've got some transactions, and that's going to be based on this transaction screen. We can get to it directly from the home, or we can get to it from here. Okay, so this transactions is almost the same, relatively very similar, except this one's got a really, really cool load and filter. This time, in this case, we're not selecting from a transaction, but we have different available options that we can select from the existing transactions here. Because we have this really cool filter, it's going to allow us to search for transactions based on date, name, account, or amount. So that means if I want to search based on a specific date and I only want to know those located on 6/7, I can do just that. And it's going to load only those transactions based on a certain date. Or perhaps maybe I want a certain name. So maybe I only want Fred as a name. It's going to search only those transactions. Let's clear that out. I don't have any on Fred, but how about David? David, sure, David will work for us. David, I only want to show David's transactions. Great, so we've got a search filter, but let's go over some of the required fields. I've got different required fields. This is very important. I've got a transaction date. I've got an expense, an income or expense. I want to know what type. I want a name, right? A name, and I want the account. That's very important. And the amount. So those are all required. I've got 5 different required fields. If I do a new transaction and I don't enter all those fields and I try to save it, I need to make sure that we know, please make sure to add transaction date, type, name, account, and amount before saving this transaction. So we had forgotten account and amount. So I want to make sure that we put those in. So that's very important. So, but I need to know how many required fields. Now, inside VBA, we don't want to check if this is empty, if this is empty. It's a lot more work. But what if I simply count all those fields of those 5? What if I count all the ones that contain a value? And if it's less than that, so we've got 5 different fields. So if we use something called count A and we look at all those and we see that 5 of those 5 do contain values using count A, we know that they can go ahead and save it because all those fields are required. Memo is not required. So this is a great way to quickly determine if all the required fields have been filled out or not. So if B2 is less than that, then we know. We've got the transaction ID, that's the specific. As we load a transaction, that ID will change. Remember, inside our transaction database, they have transaction IDs, date. So just like with that, we also want to make sure that we have the transaction row. What is the row that's associated with that? And we know that transaction number 2 is located on row 5 inside our transaction database. Transaction number 2 is located on row 5. Again, our first ones start on row 4, just like with items. So we want to make sure that we are going to use the match and we're adding 3. If there's an error, we're going to show blank, right? So if it's a new transaction, of course, it would be blank. All right, so I also want to know the next transaction ID using the max, just like we did on items. So no different there. We'll simply max all the transaction IDs. Of course, I've got a named range based on the transaction IDs, right? Named range, dynamic transaction. So the next one would be, I've got one for transaction type here, and I've got one for transaction date, that's going to help us out. So I also want to know the selected transaction row. We've got conditional formatting here. I want to know the row that's associated. Let's take a look at some of the conditional formatting. Go into this, and we're going to manage those rules. And we take a look, we've got 3 different conditional formattings. One is based on the selected row of B6. Of course, we're going to use a white font in darker color. Then I'm going to use, I want to color the odd rows, but only if they contain a value in column D. And I want to color the even rows, but only if they contain a value in column D as well, but only for even rows. So we've given that a little bit of look. So that way, odd rows have a light blue and even rows have a white for the odd rows, and then for the even rows, it's going to show that blue. Okay, so we've got that. So that's going to be conditional formatting. So that way, on our selection change event, when I make a selection change, all I need to do is place that row and place it directly in B6. That will automatically fire that conditional formatting. And what I'm going to do is I've also got a hidden column here, some hidden values here. And I've got the transaction ID located here, just as we did with that. So if we go into home again, and we see we've got a custom filter. If I change this to general, you're going to see that all those appear here. If we undo that, and remember, just as we did before, we given them a custom format. And to hide those, how do we do that? We go into more number formats and give it those 3 semicolons. That's going to hide it. Now, why is it important to have those transaction IDs here? Because when I select on a row, whatever transaction ID is located in column C, I'm going to place that transaction ID inside B3. And what that's going to do is automatically calculate that row. When I know the row of the transaction, I can automatically load that data here. And again, using data mapping, just as we did before, J4, M4, J6, J8, those are all of the cells associated with those transactions right here. J4 here, M4 here, and then J6. So they're associated with that. That's going to make coding a lot easier. I also want to know the selected name row. So what is that selected name row? And that is important. Why is that important? Because I want to know what row is associated. So if I change the name on here, remember we have names is all. I want to know to see if it's a new name. If I decide to type in Freddy, right? And I want a new name and that name doesn't exist, I want to be able to add it, right? So if I save that transaction, I want to make sure that we're saving it. Or maybe I want to add it here. So I can quickly add it as a vendor here. And if I save it, this is automatically now going to be contained inside the list quickly, and it's associated with this B7. So basically, if I have a match based on names, this is a named manager. Let's go into that so we can look at that into the formula. I know it's kind of a strange name called names. Name is our database right here, and names is our database here, and names is located here. So we have a list of names here. So what I know is if it doesn't exist on that, then it is a brand new one. Notice we've just added Freddy here. So we've added that here because we know that if it's blank here, we know that when we edit it, and I'll go over this, but now when we click it, we can add an update. So if I want to update an address here, I can do just that very, very easily with this. And of course we can save it, and I can save it and kind of change it as customer. So now if we go back into the names database, we see that it's already been added. Okay, so we'll be going over that. Like I said, this is a massive application, right? I started this Monday and it is now Friday. So working hard for you. I hope you appreciate it. Don't forget to smash that like button, share this video. We appreciate you. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, comment below. Every little bit helps maintain these videos always free. And of course, many ways to support us using the links down in the description. So continuing on with our transactions. So I wanted to explain to you, we'll be going over how to do this in a moment, but I wanted to make sure you understand why we have a named row, because it is the row that's associated with this name. As soon as we add something that doesn't exist, this is blank. That way we know how to automatically, based on this, if it's blank, we know to add a new one. However, if it is not blank, we know that we can simply add it. We can simply select it and then edit the existing one because we know the order that it's in. Great. So I also want to know the next name ID, just as we did before inside. And of course, we can do exactly the same, right? Just this same inside the orders. The same thing here, right? If we add a new one here, John Jacob Smith or Jacobs Smith. Okay, so if we add a new one, I wanted this name doesn't match data. Okay, actually, I don't want to do that. Actually, I'm going to go into the data validation just real quickly, and I want to make sure that users can enter a new one. We don't want an error, so we want the user to add something, right? So if we click here, I want to make sure that they can simply add it and save it here. Okay, good. That's exactly what I want. All right, good. So we see that, and we're going to do the same thing. So we have the same ability both in our orders and our transactions here. Okay, so we also want to know the next name ID. This is simply the max of all the name IDs, right? Name IDs are located right in our names database. These are all the names IDs. I want to know the next one, which is 26, using the max formula. So that way, when we create a new one, we know exactly what ID to assign it to, and we know if it's new or not because this is going to be blank. If it's not, we know. So we understand what we've done all this. So let's go ahead and get into some of the particular macros inside our transactions. And of course, we're going to do the same thing, transaction column, some variables here that we'll be going over as we want to load the list. The first thing, of course, when I create a brand new one, I want to make sure that we're loading this list of transactions. And it's going to be based on some filters. We know what database it's coming from. We know it's coming from the transaction database. And we have to have some dynamic search criteria. It could be name. It could be several different ones, right? So when we create that, right, I want to know what are we basing it on, right? If I create an account, right, I only want to know maybe lease expense. So when I create a name range, I only want to know those transactions associated with lease expense. So that's going to be some criteria, but it's dynamic based on the name and based on the value, right? So we take a look inside the transaction database. We have some criteria, but it is dynamic, as you saw. It's going to be based on whatever's in transactions E5. And then also what I want to know is I want to know lease expenses, but I don't want to know what if they just enter lease? I don't want always an exact match. I still want it to come up if they enter a partial match. So if I type in just lease alone, right, I want to make sure that it comes up. So what we want to do is I want to match any possibility. If we add in those asterisks before and after, as you saw in that is going to be the wild card. That means any count containing the word lease is automatically going to come up. If we just add something like E, right, you're going to see a lot of them come up, anything that contains the word E. So inside our transaction database, we want to surround it with that. However, not for every type of search, right? Because inside our transactions, if I enter an amount, let's say I want an amount, I want an exact amount or maybe a partial match, or maybe I only want to know those less than 100. So if I want to type in less than 100, I only want to know those transactions less than 100. So we can use that. So for this particular, or maybe on a date, maybe we want to set a specific date. So if we have a date here, maybe we only want to know less than 6, let's say 6, 22 now, or 2022. Okay, so we only want to know those transactions less. So we can, for these types, for both date and amount, we certainly don't want to use the asterisk, right? I want to use exactly what's in there. So we have to make a little bit of a change inside our formula. And let's take a look inside that. So our transaction, so we've got a little bit of a formula here. First of all, I want to know if it's intersearch, if the word is intersearch, then just put in does not equal, right? Intersearch is just the default. So we certainly don't want to search for intersearch. Otherwise, what if it's name or it's account, if it's name or account, if the user has searched by name or by account, only then are we going to use the asterisk based on whatever they've entered, which is F5. We're going to add the asterisk before and after it. That's going to be automatically, so there's wildcard. So that means any search containing those will be out. However, what if it is amount or what if it is date? In that case, we're simply going to put in exactly what the user has entered, transactions, right? So that means exactly as. So here it's less than 6.2. But what if I only wanted a 6.1? Well, I can do that as well inside transaction. If I want to search only on a specific day, I just do 6.1 and it's going to enter those transactions only. So you see in date and amount, we're going to enter exactly what the user has entered. Otherwise, if it is account or name, we're going to use the asterisk. And we can clear the filter here. I'm just going to clear the filter. Okay, so now that we understand how the criteria works inside our transactions, we want those search results to come here. And I want the transaction ID, the date, the name, account, amount. All that information is going to be coming directly over inside here. However, of course, that transaction ID is hidden using the 3 semicolons. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to run that advanced filter, and that's all we're going to do. So if we clear the filter, right, loading the list is here. Let's go over that, clearing the filters next. So all we're going to do is certainly clear all the existing transactions. So when we run this, I want to make sure that from C7 all the way through G and down, everything gets cleared out. That's the first thing we want to do. So inside the transactions, B6, I also want to know why is B6 important. B6 is also a selected transaction row. I want to clear that out too. That's going to remove that conditional formatting. So I want to clear that out. Okay, and also I want to clear out all the associated data here, clearing all existing transactions. Then we're going to focus on the transaction database, determining the last row. If it's less than 4, that means we have no data. We're going to exit the sub out. We're going to run our advanced filter. Our advanced filter is going to be coming directly inside our transaction. We're going to come all the way to G, from A3 through G. that criteria is going to be L2 through L3, and those results are going to come O3 through S. And that's exactly what we have inside our advanced filter. A3 through G, our results L2 through L3, and our results O2 through S2. We're going to determine the last row of our results based on column O. If it's less than 3, that means we have no data, right? If it's less than 3 here, we know we've got no data. If we do have data, I'm going to bring all of that data over. So the transaction C7 through the last row plus 4, and that's important because our data starts on row 3 here, while inside our transactions, our row starts on row 7. So we need to compensate for that by adding 4, and that's just what we do right here. And then we're going to bring those transactions over. And then, of course, if transaction, what I also want to do, when I clear that filter, notice that that row got removed, right? We removed, but what I want to do is when we run that filter, I want to look for that transaction ID here. And if it's found, remember, it's hidden. So you can see up here in the formula bar, it's 1, right? So what I want to do is I want to take this transaction ID and I want to look to see if that transaction ID is here. If it's found, whatever row it's found on, notice it's found on 7 here, I want to place that 7 right here. So if I clear that filter, you see that that 7 got placed right here. That 7 got placed here because it was found on row 7. That's going to trigger the conditional formatting so that the user knows automatically what transaction has already been loaded, right? So if I select here and I clear the filter out here, I want that exact row to be selected again. Remember, when we clear the filter out, this gets deleted, but I still want to know what selected row. So once we locate, we know the transaction ID is here. Once we locate the transaction ID here has been loaded, so we're going to check to make sure that that row gets selected again simply by adding the row in here. And that's what we're going to do here. However, if there's no transaction ID in B3, then we can exit the sub out. So we're going to simply look. If B3 or B4 meaning there's no row associated with that, we're going to exit the sub. Then what I want to do is I want to place directly inside B6. Remember, B6 is where it's going to go. I want to look for this transaction ID, and I want to look in here. If it's found, whatever row it's found on, place it directly inside B6. That's what we're going to do with this line of code. B6 is equal to transaction C7 through there. We're looking for whatever's in B3. We're going to extract the row. If it's found, we're going to place it in B6. If it's not, it could create an error. So make sure you wrap it in on error, resume next. On error, go to 0. Okay, and then if B6 does not equal empty, then what I want to do is I just want to select, and that makes sure that once we select D, it's going to automatically load in that transaction. It's going to automatically load it in. And that way, any changes that have been taking place will automatically load it in. Okay, great. So that's all we can use. So that's important because if we've made an update, right, if I change this to test memo 7, right, and I make that change and I update that list and I save it, right, and I want to make sure, please add, oh, we haven't added David. Okay, let's save it. I like that, adding Davis. We've added that. Now he's been added. And so now we see that test memo 7 we select here. That test memo 7, that memo's automatically been updated. Okay, great. So clearing the filter, all we need to do is just click enter search, right? As soon as I make a change here, it's going to trigger that. How do we know that? Well, let's take a look inside the transaction screen here, transactions here. Here, we take a look inside. If we make a change, a worksheet change to F5, and we want to make sure that there is nothing, then we're going to automatically load this list. So basically, any change that we make to F5, we're going to run that macro that we just went over, load list. So that macro gets run automatically here. And likewise, if we make a selection change, remember we're making selection change here, we want something to happen. I want to take whatever's in C and the selected row and I place it directly inside B3 and then load it up. So we're going to make sure if count large, user selects more than one cell, exit the sub. If the user makes a selection change from D7, and we want to make sure that C contains a value. C, of course, is that transaction ID. We want to make sure. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take B6 and I'm going to place it directly. I want to know that row. Remember that selected row must go directly in B6. And the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take whatever values in C, I'm going to place it directly inside B3. So B3 is simply going to equal C in the target row. Set that transaction ID. And then we're going to run the macro to load the transactions. So that's all we have to do. Clearing the filter, as soon as we enter search in here, any change to F5 is automatically going to trigger this macro to run. So we don't need to run it again. When we add a new transaction, all we're going to be doing is clearing a bunch of associated cells, setting J4, setting that default date. New, I want to make sure the current date, June 10th, right? J is going to take on that current date. And I want to make sure that J6 select. There's one more thing I want to add. Remember, we were discussing having a default account. Remember, we discussed that early on in the training. This account, we want to set the default J8. What do we want it to equal? We want it to equal whatever's located here in admin G. And we could just call this, let's go give it a name, which I like called default transaction account. Okay, makes it easier. Oops, spelled that wrong. Default transaction. Okay, let's set that up. And notice when you create that, we want to create, it's better to redo it through the name manager. So default transaction account, edit that and just update that. Default transaction account. That's what I'd like to call it. I'm going to copy that and click OK. And name exists because we added it twice, so that's fine. All right, no problem. So they're both here. We can just delete this one here. Good. Okay. I wish it would replace it, on a single cell, but it just adds to it instead of replacing it. Okay, great. So what we want to do is dot range. And what is that called? So what is the cell located? We want to place it directly inside a particular cell. Inside that, let's go ahead and do the transactions again here. And I want to place it directly inside J8. So the transaction J8 dot range J8 for the default is simply equal to, we can use the brackets here to make it a lot quicker, pasting that default transaction. That's going to set the default transaction count. That way for new transactions, it's automatically going to set that account if you have that available. I mean, if you've added it. So now when we go back in here and we just add in our default, creating a new transaction, it's also going to add in that default account right here. Okay, good. I like that. So we've now added in that default account and we're going to select J6 and that's going to let the user automatically add in anything they want here inside J6. Continuing on with our code. Now what we're going to do is we're going to save and update the transaction. We'll move a little quicker because these are very, very simple. As we mentioned before, B2 is the number of required fields. If it's not 5, we know that they have not added enough required fields. We're going to let them know. If B8 equals empty, I want to let the user know to please save this transaction before. Remember, how do we know that? Well, B8 is our thing. So if we added either none, right? So if B8 contains a value, I know it's an existing name. If it is not, if I put in another name, I want to, if B8 is empty, I need to know to let the user to add that name before. So if B8 is empty, please add and save whatever's in J6. So we're going to try to save it. Please make sure to add transaction date. Okay, we didn't add the amount here, so let's add that first. Then click save, and we see please add SDSS before saving this transaction, right? So we can add it, we can cancel that. So this is going to let us know to add that name first, which I really like. Okay, so it says here, so we know because that name has never been saved. What we're going to be doing is we're going to let the user know for this message box, and we're going to run a macro called transaction add edit name. We'll be going over this macro in a little bit, just a little bit. Transaction add edit name, and that's going to automatically pop up that user form. So if B8 still equals empty, we're going to, even after they've run this macro to add it, if it's still empty, we're going to exit this up. Okay. If B4 equals empty, we know it's a new. So now we need to differentiate between in a brand new transaction, meaning B4 is empty, or an existing transaction where B4 contains a row. So we need to differentiate that. If it is new, all we need to do is set a new transaction row based on the first available row, setting that next transaction ID, placing it from B5 into B3, and setting that new transaction ID in column 8. If it's an existing transaction, we're just going to extract that row directly from B4. Then we're going to run data mapping just as we did before, simply taking all of the information from the ranges there that we've mapped out and placing that inside the database, the transaction database. Then we're going to simply run the macro, that macro we've already been over to reload the list, and then a fade out message. And then fade out message is simply just what we did before. And we just click save and it's going to be a fade out. Oh, Mary Poppins, we've saved that before. Okay, there we go. Saving that. Okay, so now we see transactions saved here. So we've got that available here. So I like that very much. Very good. Now moving on, right? That fade out message is simply the same thing that we went over before. Loading the transaction, again, we're going to clear the contents. Going to make sure that B4 contains a value, right? We've already know as soon as we run this, that macro to load it, it's going to run as long as we have a row located in B4. If it does have a row, of course, we're going to put that into a variable called transaction row. We're then going to use data mapping in the reverse style, simply adding all that data in and then turning on application screen updating. That is it. Deleting the transaction, very, very similar to items. All we're going to be doing is making sure, has the transaction been saved before? We're going to get after the warning message. If it has never been saved because B4 is empty, we're just going to skip deleting the row. But if there is a row, we're going to put that into a variable. Then what I want to do is just, actually, we don't need this here. we can just delete that. That's not necessary. Transaction row, delete the entire row. Delete that transaction row. We don't need it twice there. That's not going to be helpful. Okay, so the transaction, deleting the transaction row, and then we're going to add the new transaction and reload the list. That is it. All right, now this is one. Remember, we had another one called transaction add or edit name. This is the marker that's automatically been tied to this. Right? So I've got a brand new user form. This user form is located right here called add edit names. This is a user form. It's very, very cool because it allows us to, one, have a drop-down list. We've got customer, vendor, employee, name, and we've got different fields associated with that. This is called field 1, field 2, 3, and it's going to go all the way to field 7. They're given specific names. This one is called name type. This one is called status, right? So we've got different field names. So this is going to allow us to add or edit names. When I run this macro that's going to allow us to edit names, what I want to do is I want to determine if it's a new or an existing. So transaction add or edit name. We're going to define the name field as control and the name row as long and the name column as long. We're going to be using another data mapping. What I want to do is I want to clear any fields in the form first. So the first thing with the transactions focusing on this screen, I want to know, is it a new name or is it an existing name? That's very important, right? A new name, notice Harold Banks is new, while Mary Badger, David Davis is existing, meaning B8. So, right, if I haven't added Mary Badger, I think I added that through the database. So I think if you add it in the database, notice that Harold Banks here has not been added. So if I decide to edit here, we know it is a new name because B8 is empty, right? If we look inside our names database, we don't see that Harold Banks is in here anywhere at all. So we know it's going to be brand new. Okay, so to do that, we need to differentiate. B8's that differentiator. If it's empty, it is a new name. What I want to do is I want to take that field 1 from our form here, the value of that, and whatever's in J6, I want to place there. J6 is inside, it is our name transaction right here. So what that means automatically when I launch this form, I want that name to go directly inside field 1. I'd also want to set it as a vendor. So what I want to do is I want to set that default to whatever the vendor name is. That type, remember the name type here, this is the field that we were going to focus on here. This is our name type right up here. This first one's called name type. I want to set that up to vendor, right? Because normally if we enter a transaction, of course we can change it, but we're just assuming that they want to enter a vendor, and this maybe not a customer. I also want to set the default to active, right? That status value to active. However, if it is an existing, I just want to set the name row. This would be existing name because B8 contains a value. If it is existing, like Mary Poppins is here, or David Davis is here, I want to make sure that we're going to load all the information. I think this one has address as well. I want to make sure to load all the information associated with that vendor, pulling in all the information from the names database. So if Asia Electric, I want to put in their PO, their city, state. I want to bring all that inside the form using data mapping. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing what we're going to be doing is we're going to set that name row, whatever's in B8. I want to know the database row. Then what I'm going to do is run another loop, right, from 3 to 9. Why 3 to 9? Because we already know that it's name ID. We know that it's customer from 3 here all the way to the last 9, okay? Actually to the email, which is 9 here. If we take a look inside this column, equals column, we see that that is column 9, okay? So I'm going to run it there. That's the one I want to run. And I want to run a loop, okay? So this is going to help us out. Notice that we've defined the name field as a control. So we're going to set that name field to equal to add or edit. This is our form name, controls field, and then the name column -2. Why is this important? Our column starts out at 3. But our first field name, which is our name, is field 1. Do we remember that? The name of this field that's located field 1. This is field 2. So I want to put that name from column 3 inside field 1. So to do that, we need to map the data. So name column 3 -2, this is 1. Field and field 1. So our name is going to come from 3. So we're going to loop through that. So our name field value is equal to the names based on whatever's in the name row and the name column. This is our database. This is where it's coming from. So this will loop out. This saves us a lot of code so we can automatically fill in that form using data mapping. And then the last two, I want to set the name type, right? That add or edit name. This one, the name type based on whatever's in column B. And I want to set the status whatever in column J. So again, taking a look at this, our type is in column B, our status is in column J. We're setting those two because those are different fields. Those are drop-down lists, so they're slightly different. Okay, great. So that's all we have to do. And then I'm just simply going to display the form. And that way, as soon as we run that form, that has been tied to this button here. So when we edit that, we see that all the data will load automatically. And if we decide to change that or save it, we can automatically update it. So if I decide to save this, clicking save, it's automatically going to update it here. How do we do that? Well, that's the save button. So if we go in here and we click view code, we see that we have the save button clicked. This is the code that runs automatically. This is the code that runs on cancel. We have two buttons, cancel, which is simply going to hide the form, and the other button called save button. So this is going to save our fields. So again, we're going to do name field as a control. We want the name row and the name column as long, just as we did before. I want to make sure that they've put in the required fields. If the field one, which is the name, is empty or the type is empty, then we're going to make sure to please add a name and type before saving. We're going to exit the sub. Those are required. So once we know we've got the required fields, then we're going to focus on that names database. We're going to check for a new or an existing. What I want to know is if active sheet B8 equals new name. Well, now, why are we using active sheet? The reason we're using active sheet is because I have this type of details and programming based on two different sheets, transactions and orders. Let's take a look in here. Both of them use the same cells, B8 and B9, right? I've used the same. So we can use active sheet. Selected name row is going to be here. So we can use this same additional feature for both the order sheet and the transaction sheet. So that's why we're going to use active sheet, because either one we're using the same detail, same cells. So if active sheet B8 is empty, we know that there's no row that's associated with that name. We know it's a new one. I need to find a new row for that. That name row is going to be the first, based on the names database, the first available row, right? Then what I want to do is I want to take that next ID, right? Now look inside here. This is the next ID using the max formula. Also inside the order screen, same thing. B9 is going to have the next one, exactly the same cells. So we can do the same function on either screen as long as we use active sheet, because we know if they're on orders and they decide to add a new name, or if they're on transaction, it's going to be B9. B9 is going to come from that active sheet. So we know that our ID is going to come from the active sheet B9. This is our unique ID. Otherwise, what if it's an existing? So existing, we'll put this existing name. All we need to do is extract the row directly from B8. This is our existing name row. Everything else we're going to do whether it is a new or an existing name. We're simply going to make those updates, right? So column B is going to take on the type. Column J is going to take on the status. Then all we need to run the loop for the remaining fields from 3 to 9, just like we did before, except in reverse. Before we loaded the information into the form, now we're taking the form details and putting it into the database. We're going to set that name field again, just like we did before, field name control. Our first field is field 1, but our column 3. So 3 minus 2 is 1, field 1, all the way to field. All right, okay, so then we're going to simply take whatever's in that database, names database, the name row, the name column is equal to the field name value. This adds or updates the field data inside the database. Okay, so that's it. That's all we have to do. Then we just simply hide that form. Then what I want to do is once we've made a change, I want to run a macro called names update and sort. Remember, we have that macro here called names update. Actually, I haven't gone over this macro. Simply, all we're doing here in this macro, which we will go over in a bit, is simply updating those names. We did go over briefly, updating the names to make sure that we have a macro that's going to update all names. Now, I want our names are separated between customers, vendors, and employees. So I want 3 lists, one with all names, one with customers, one with vendors, and one with employees. So there's a macro that we're going to go over shortly that's going to do all that hard work and heavy lifting for us to separate it into 3 different rules. Why? Because we need names, customers for invoices, I need vendors for purchase orders, and I need employees to assign to employees for work orders and other things. So our orders are, of course, our employees are assigned here. So I need 3 different lists, right? Vendors for here, for invoices, we're going to need, when we have invoices, we're going to need invoices. So we need 3 different lists for that. So that's going to help us. So on our names database, we need to create a macro that's going to do that. And as soon as we make any changes to a name, we want these lists automatically to be sorted through a macro. And that macro is located right here called update and sort. Now what I want to do is I want to differentiate a little bit between, remember I said we can run this macro whether we're on orders or transactions. So if we're on orders, what I want to do is I want to set, once we've updated, if we're on the orders form, whatever changes that we've made to value on that name, I want to put it in F5, right? So if I've decided I've made a change, I want to make sure that that change gets reflected inside F5. What is F5? Well, that is right here, right? So if I decide I'm going to add a name, right, and I want to update that, let's say I want to update somebody's name, let's say John James, and I want to update John James, and I want to give him a last name Smith, right? I want to make that update. So when I make that update, I want to make sure that that change gets reflected directly inside F5, right? If I decide to make that additional change, like here, Asian Electric, and I want to take away that S, I want to make sure that that change gets reflected directly inside J6. So here we have the differentiate. So if we're on orders, we certainly need to update F5, which is the name on the orders. Otherwise, inside the transactions, on the transaction sheet, J6 is going to take on that updated field. That way we update the name inside that field as well, whether we're on orders or whether we're on the transaction sheet. And that is it. That's all we need to do as far as saving this. So that's all we need to do, relatively easy. Okay, very good. So inside the transactions macros, we've gone over added, edit name. We've covered all the transactions. We've covered all the items, and we've covered most of the add and edit names. Very good. We're making great progress. We're going to focus on the order macros and the order sheet macros. So that's what we're going to go over right now. Mentioned earlier, this order sheet has the capability to handle 4 different types of orders, whether it's estimates, work orders, invoices, or purchase orders. This sheet can handle it all because there's so many similarities between those 4 different types of orders. We might as well combine them into a single sheet. However, we certainly want to make sure that they look and act very differently so that users don't get confused which type of order they're on. And so what we've done is we've used conditional formatting to color them accordingly, and so they can have each one has a different look and feel. Now, when we do change the order types, we have the order type located inside B2. So when we change it to a work order, B2 is always going to tell us what that order type is. We've given B2 a very important named range called order type so that we can refer to that both using formulas, inside conditional formatting, and inside the VBA code. So we're going to often refer to this order type here, the name range right up here. You can see this. That's very important. So the first thing which you'll obviously recognize very quickly is the conditional formatting that's used to differentiate between the colors of those type of forms. And it is based on that conditional formatting on that. So let's go ahead and take a look inside some of the cells here, and we'll look at some of the conditional formatting that we're using. So we're going to click on Manage Rules, selecting some, and we see that we have different colors based on this. So we've got our header row, we've got the second row, we've got our header row, which is row 1. We've got our second row, which is row 2, and then we have the remaining rows. Each one of them has individual conditional formatting. And our natural color, which is the color, is blue. So invoicing is blue. So we don't need to change anything to blue because that is our original color. So we're going to make changes for estimates, work orders, and purchase orders. So each one of those is relatively simple. If B2 equals admin C5, we can actually change this to the estimate order. So we can change it. I generally like to go with that. So we'll do estimate order. So this is the same thing, the same named range. We're going to get the same output when we apply it. So there's going to be no difference. So if B2 equals estimate order, we're going to give it this yellow color for row 1. And this yellow color, just like they are, it's simply a fade out color that we're going to use, which is the medium yellow to a little bit lighter yellow. So when we go into the fill, we use the fill effects, and we see that it is this darker yellow to the medium yellow. Okay, and we've done simply that on the second row. So the second row that we have, row 2 here, on our edit row is that medium color based on the estimator. So when we do the fill effects, we see that we have that medium color to that light color yellow. Okay, so only, of course, when our B2 equals the estimate order. And then lastly, all the remaining cells, which is all the cells all the way around this estimate order, including the header here, we've given it that light yellow color. So this is a single color. When we formatted this is that light yellow, that single color yellow. So I've done this exact same thing, whether we're on admin. Remember, this can say work order. I'll edit that to underscore work order, which is the same thing. Work, right? You can use named ranges to make sure you got the named range correct, work order. Okay, this is the same one. And it's B2 equals work order. So the greens and then likely the purchase order all have the purple. So we're going to use that and click apply, and then we have everything there. So that when we change this from to work order, we get the green, from to purchase order, we get the purple, and our original color, which doesn't have any from, this is our original color, that blue. So each one of those contains a different color. Now we have some additional formatting. As we notice here, income and payment amount, those are visible for both invoices and for purchase orders. However, when we select on estimates or when we select on work orders, we see that those two fields are hidden. So we've used conditional formatting to do that. So when we go into the home and we conditional formatting, we see that we have additional ones. For order type equals work order, we want to color those green, right? So we've got some additional formatting. And we also want to color, we don't want to remove the borders. So we've removed the borders for both estimate orders and order types. If either one of those are actually, we can remove some. So let's take a look at this rule here. We format that and we look in the borders and we see that the right border has been removed, right? So I don't want that right border to show up for both work orders and estimate orders. If the order type equals estimate order or the order type equals work order, in that case, I want to remove the right border. And we're going to apply that to C11 and C12. So we want to remove that right border. And again, just likewise, in C12 to D12, what do I want to do? If we edit that rule again, if either one of those are estimate order, what I want to do is I want to remove the top and the bottom borders, right? I want to remove those. And that's on row 12, so I don't want to remove those borders. So basically, we just don't want to show those on either estimates or work orders, okay? So, but otherwise, both purchase orders or invoices can have the income account, okay? So that's pretty much it for the conditional formatting. And we have a little bit more on the taxes. I've got some additional conditional formatting down here. Payments and balance, that's not going to show up on work orders. So when we click on work orders, we see that there's obviously a lot more here. We're not going to show up. And also estimates here. Estimates would also not have, would have a total, but we wouldn't want to show any payments. So we don't want to show any information. So when I click here and go into the conditional format and we see manage rules, we got some additional rules here. So let's take a look at this rule or, so this particular rule or order type, when we look at this, we see both for work order and order estimate order. For both of those, what do I want to do? I want to give it the font color. I want to give it a white font color. That white font color will hide the payments and the subtotal. Certainly for both estimates and work orders, we do not want to show any type of a payment or any type of a balance on that. So we certainly don't want that. However, on work orders, we also want to add additional work orders. We see we don't have any total fields, prices or total, so we don't want them to show up on work orders. And we also certainly don't want to show other things on work orders. So we notice we want to hide this entire section on work orders. So when we look down here, we see the work orders, the type work order, we give it a format, we see that the borders, the right border has been hidden and we've given it that information. The font here is going to be automatic. So let's go ahead and switch to work orders so we can see how that applies automatically. On work orders, we see that we've hidden everything. Everything's been hidden. So we've got a lot more for work orders, hiding up all those borders, right? So going into the home, right? Conditional formatting and manage those rules. And we see that we have a lot more on work orders. Here on work orders, we've got a lot of information here. All these cells we want to hide. What do I want to do? I want to hide that font, right? So we're going to format that. And we see that the font here is white. We've chosen a font color of white so that we can hide those on work orders because we don't want to show any total information on work orders. So we can see how conditional formatting can also hide both rows, both information, and both cells using the font color, and also we can hide the borders on that for those that we don't want to. Conditional formatting is a great way to help us differentiate between type of orders. We also have a conditional formatting here. We also want the font. We notice that the font size, both the font and the text are different, right? We notice that we now have a formula called order type. So the order type, whichever is located in B2, is automatically going to be in uppercase, and it is automatically going to show that one. So when we click invoice, it's automatically going to show whatever is located in B2, which is our order type. And we have conditional formatting here also to change the color of that. So we have three different conditional formatting for purchase order, work order, and estimate order. The natural color, the inherent original color, is blue. So this is what you're seeing now. No conditional formatting applies. However, when we change it to purchase order, the font will go to purple, work order green, and the estimate order this brown or yellow. Okay. So that's how we change that there. And that's going to be really helpful as we go on. All right, let's take a look at some of the additional data. Notice when we change this to work order, we see that a lot of things change. This changes to work order number. This changes to work order date. We can simply use that order type and the number inside a formula. We can simply use the employee name here. We can simply use the order type and the date here. So that way we can automatically customize that. So we've got that inside there. So inside the estimate, it's going to show estimate date, estimate number. Inside the purchase order, we're going to show purchase order date, purchase order. All we need to do is add in the order type. Very, very helpful. We also have conditional formatting here for both work orders and estimates so that we can hide that. So that's just conditional formatting just as we did before. Okay, great. And we can see that we can use the formula to add in the dynamic order name, the order type name here as well. And we can have that here too. Another thing that we have here is I've got here vendor showing on purchase orders. However, on estimates, work orders, and invoices, it's going to show customer. We can use simply formula for that. If the order type equals purchase order, show the vendor name. Remember, this is a dynamic name using vendor name, right? Just in case we forget, remember, vendor name, this is the vendor name, whatever you use, right? If you want to change this to purchaser, right? Let's say we change this to purchaser, right? We want to show that. We want to make sure that that gets automatically reflected in the orders, right? So that's very important. So when we check purchase order, right, we want to make sure that this says purchaser, right? So it changes the word to purchaser automatically. That's why we're using that dynamic one here in the vendors. So we can change that very, very easily. And we can change it back to vendors, so I'm familiar with that. So great, we can quickly see there's that extra home. I was looking for that, couldn't find it. Interesting. So back to home, back into orders here, we're going to go look. And also what I want to do is I want to be able to show dynamically, right? Of course, we got some data validation that's going to help us, but I want to make sure we've gone over all the screens. So again, here, we're going to use that dynamic order status, right? Order type along with the status so that it says purchase order status, or whether it shows estimate status, or whether it shows work order or purchase order status. You get the point, right? We're using the dynamically, same thing for here. So that status is going to be done here. Okay, very, very good. In this particular, regardless of the form type, we're going to have a total in here that's automatically going to total it. So we're going to, let's just bring up a particular estimate. Actually, let's bring up an estimate here, or invoice would be fine here. So what I want to do is I want to have a formula. This formula will always be here. We've got a limited number of rows, so it's okay to put in a formula here. Certainly we can use VBA to put in the formula, but in this case we can just use this. If G10 equals empty, meaning there's no quantity, then show empty. Otherwise multiply G10 times H10, okay? Otherwise show blank. So does this formula, so that way anything that's blank, as soon as we add it in another item, that total is going to automatically be present. As soon as we change the quantity, that of course total is going to automatically update. Great. We have the payment amount here. So if we decide to enter a payment amount here, that payment amount is going to be reflected inside here. Notice this is linked to D12. So D12 is the payment amount. So that is automatically going to be reflected. We're going to have a subtotal, which is the sum of the total, right? We're also going to have the tax, right? The tax is going to be multiplied subtotal by whatever the sales tax rate is, the sales tax rate. And actually that should be changed, right? It's going to be either the sales tax or the purchase tax, right? So we should update that. Let's make an update, because why is that important? Because we have a purchase tax rate. This is not going to be accurate for purchase order, so I do need to update that. If I decide I'm going to put in a purchase order, right? We notice here's a purchase order. This is going to be the purchase tax, which is 5%, not the sales tax rate. So what we want to do is we want to make an update. If, right, our order type, let's do order type, right, is equal to the purchase, equal to, let's say, the invoice type, which is the invoice order, then sure, we're good to use that sales tax rate. Otherwise, right, I want to use the purchase tax rate. Otherwise, I want to multiply I-35 here times the purchase tax rate, which is right here, okay? So the purchase tax rate is different. I want to make sure you clear that up, okay? And then fix that up. Don't forget the comma. This is then times, not and, okay? Excellent. So now we have automatically, so now we can calculate that. We have the payments here. We can calculate the payments, obviously. Can't have $50, we can have a $50 payment, so we have a balance here. That's going to look good. So that way our purchase tax is automatically based on whatever the purchase rate is, if it is not an invoice order. Okay, good. I like that. So we have a dynamic taxing based on either the purchase order or the invoice. We have the payments amount. We have the total, which is simply the sum of both the subtotal and the purchase tax. And then we have the balance, which is simply our payment amount minus the balance amount. That's going to get us that. Okay, great. So we have an understanding of the basic idea of what we're focused on here. We're going to be able to search for an order. That footer message we have seen, we have that footer message. It's going to be linked to a formula. And if we remember correctly, we do have named ranges associated with that footer message. We've got two named ranges. one called the footer message text and one called the footer message name, right? We have those two. So if I want to extract that footer message text, we can use an index to do that. And we're going to base it on the footer message that the user has selected, located directly here in D9. If they have selected a footer message called delivery time, I'm going to index that footer message text, and I'm going to extract that based on the row, and I want the column. And so basically all we're doing when the end user enters the footer message here, I want whatever text associated with that to show that right here. Okay, so when they change that, it is automatically selected here. Great, so that's just simply that. And I've centered it and increased the font a little bit to get us a nice footer message automatically. Very, very good. So we understand that, and also we have the account set up with that. Now, keep in mind that this is an expense account. Expense accounts are associated with the purchase orders if we have the expense out. However, if we create a brand new invoice, we certainly don't really want those to become income accounts. So we've got some data validation that's going to change based on that. If we take a look inside the data, we take a look inside the data validation, we see that the accounts are associated with income accounts on this invoice for cell D11. However, if we change this to purchase order, we see that we have some differences here. So if we take a look inside the data validation, we now see that the accounts associated are the expense accounts, right? When we purchase materials, we need them expensed out. When we invoice, we need them income. So we're going to use the same cell, and all we need to use is differentiate between the two different accounts listed. And I'm going to show you how VBA can change that based on, of course, the order type. And then we have the payment amount here. Okay, great. So let's get into some of the VBA to see how all this is working. We're going to start with the on-sheet code because there's a lot of sheet that's going on code. When we select a vendor here, we want the address to show up here, right, when we make a change. So let's go ahead and go on to the on-sheet code, and so we can see what's happening here. So we're going to click on the order sheet. And we don't have too much code, just a little bit of code here, a few lines of code, right, Sammy? Along with this, so we've got the item row, name row, the found item as arranged, because I'm going to need to look for that item, and the order type. That order type is very important. So when a user makes a change to E10 through E34, what do we want to happen? E10 through E34, all the way down here. Well, what do I want to happen? Well, if they select an item, I want to have the item description, the quantity, default quantity, the price, and the total automatically appear here, assuming that the item is a correct item that they've selected from the list. If they don't, let them know that it's an incorrect item. Okay, so when they have a correct item here, and also I want to make sure that, of course, if they do type it in, I want to make sure that it's automatically auto-populated. So we have auto-population, autocomplete right here as well, using the same thing. Again, we have those links. Notice that those links are down here, just like we did before. Remember, so I have again here, spaces located here, just as we went over before. So we have the don't break the chain method. We have all these cells filled with values, spaces, right, to make sure that it is linked to this chain. Again, if we were to take a look at that and we were to change it back to general, you would see all of those items appear here, but they're hidden because of using the 3 semicolons. And again, we've used that here as long as they're linked. So I'm going to control undo that, control Z, it's going to go back to hidden. That's what I want. So they can quickly add a new item. So if I want, let's say grind and brew, let's type started in GRI and grind and brew, automatically it's going to come up. Okay, using autocomplete. So what happens if this particular item has been found inside our item database, I then want to extract the description on that. What is the sales description or whatever? Let's go ahead and put that disappeared. So we have our purchase description here. So what I want to do is I want to have the purchase description, the sales description, or the work description appear based on the type. That's very important. How is that different? Notice that inside our orders here, take a look, based on, we have a purchase description. However, if we're adding a new work order, we want our add stock value. This is going to be our work description. And then if we click invoice, we have an invoice description that we use on sales. So we have 3 different descriptions based on the form type. Estimates would also handle, of course, the same. Estimates and invoices would both get the same description. So for those types, we would also find out that the sales and estimate would have the same description. Purchase orders would get this description. Work orders would get this description. So that's very important. So it's going to be based on the type. So when a user makes a change, I want to make sure that B3 is false. What is B3? Well, B3 is when we're loading a specific invoice, when we're loading, right, this is going to go to true. And that means when I load it, that's also a change, right? We're also making changes here. But that type of change is different. That type of change, I want to load whatever was previously saved here inside our order item database right here. here. And that way, if we make a change to it, that change gets saved. What do I mean by that? So let's say I want to change this to commercial brewer. Let's just say 1 set. I want to change this just this once to 1 set, right? And I want to save and update that, right? And now if I just clear that, open and dub, I want to make sure that that automatically sets up Johnson Brewer, but I don't want to save that in the main file. So if I put that in again, right, I want to save whatever is in the work order description here. So this is the update. So this is the work order description. I had some older data here on that. So I want to make sure the work order description comes up on a work order. However, if we add, let's say, a new estimate, I want to make sure it is the sales date. So if I put in brewer, right, I want to make sure that the sales description appears here on an estimate or on an invoice, okay? So let's continue down with the code. So we want to make sure that B3 is false, right? B3 means when they're loading, when this is loading from a previously, this will go to true, and we'll explain that. Differentiate between that. So either it's going to come from our items database right here, one of these 3 values, or if it is an existing one, it's going to come directly from whatever description we previously entered. Notice we save this, right? We want it to come from here, okay? We know that. Okay, so we want to make sure that B3 is false. We want to set the order type into a variable that comes from B2, okay? We're going to set that. And also what I want to do is if E does not equal empty, meaning the user has entered a value. If they have entered a value, we're going to continue. What if they haven't? What if they've cleared it out? If they've deleted it, I want to make sure that we've deleted it. So we need to differentiate between entering a value here or clearing it out by entering a blank. If it's blank, we're going to do something else, and that is clear everything out. If it is not blank, we're going to enter that. So we're going to first check to see if it's blank. If it is not blank, right here, contains text, okay, we're going to check it out. What do we want to do? First, I want to set the item row, right? I want to find out this item row. That's very important. That's the item row from its existing database. I want to look for this item name inside our list of item names. I want it found, and I want to know the row that's associated with that. We can use the find command to do that. So we're going to look in the items database. We're going to use that item name. Remember, not the sorted one, the original one, the item name. I want to look for the target value, I mean the one the user just put in. And I want to extract the row out of that using the find. And I want to put that inside a variable called item row. If it has been found, it won't be 0. If it's 0, let the user know the item was not found. However, if it has been found, then I want to move on. We're going to use select case. And why is that? Because remember, we need to do different things based on that, right? I also have a different price, right? I have a sales price and I have a purchase cost, right? If it's a purchase order, I want to put that purchase cost in. If it's a sales price, I want to put the different amount in. So we can see here, it's inside, this would be the sales. So if we put in that first item here, let's say brewer, right? Brewer, right? I want to put in that 845. However, if it is a purchase, right? If we're making a purchase, I want to put in a different price, right? So brewer here, this one I want to put in that price of $7.49. So this is the purchase price, and it's going to be based on this purchase type. So we need to differentiate between those two. So if it is an order, if the order type is in the estimate order or the invoice, either one of those, right, sales or estimate, then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting the sales or estimate description into column F, right? That sales or estimate description is going to come directly from our column D here. D is where I want to put it directly inside column F here. So that's going to come from here. I also want to put that sales price. That sales price is going to be coming from column H. It's going to go into here, H, and it's also going to be coming directly from column H here, right? We see our sales price is in column H. Our purchase price is in column I. So we need to differentiate them. Of course, for sales and for estimates and invoices, we want to make sure that sale price goes in there. So it's going to come right here. Continuing on, that's if it is an either one estimate. What if it's a work order? Well, if it's a work order, I want to take the work description. And where's that work description? That work description, we're going to be work for a specific item, is located in column F, right? F, we're going to take whatever work description and we're going to put it directly in F. So that's if it's a work order. Also, if it's a work order, I want to make sure that we're clearing the cost. Right? I don't want to put any specific cost in column H. I want to clear whatever's there. What if it's a purchase order? If it's a purchase order, we're going to pull in, extract that purchase description from the items database. I want to put in that purchase description coming from column E. In this case, column E is what's going to go into column F. And I also want to extract that purchase price, as you saw, and place that directly inside column H. So that's what we're going to be doing if the order is case of a purchase order. Column F. Notice we're using variables because this is user-defined purchase order name, user-defined work order name, and so on and so forth. So the purchase order is located here. And we will be applying the purchase description and the purchase cost. Okay, we're going to, regardless of the type of form, we're going to set that default quantity to 1, and then the user can change it. So G is going to take on that default quantity. Just put in QTY, make sure. Okay, so now all we have that. So what we're going to be doing, what if it's else, cleared item? This is, of course, this is if it contains a value. This is if the user has cleared it, right? So if it's cleared it, you saw what happened, right? As soon as we clear it, what do we want to do? I want to make sure that F through H is all cleared out, and it's automatically going to clear out the total, although the formula is still there. So F through H is going to clear it out. Also, I have a save the database button. If this has been previously saved, let's pull up one that has been previously, whoops, I clicked email order. Don't want to do that, but we'll show you that in a little bit later. No need to email that just yet. Oh, nice. Okay, so if we have a previously saved order, let's pull this up. Let's say order 8. I also want to have a database row associated with that. Why is that important? If we take a look inside this order, we see that order 1, we have a database row 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if we pull in order 1, I want to save these rows so I know what row inside the database it is important. So we have that here. So if I pull up order number 1, I want to put those, and I want to put them right here. Of course, they're hidden just like the others are. We don't need to see that, but if we were to change it back to general, we would see that 4, 5, and 6 are saved. These are the row numbers that have been here, right? So these are the database row numbers. If I delete one, I want to make sure that we also clear out the row number. And when we save it, we'll also clear it out. So we want to clear that out in case we need that. Okay, so actually J through K, we need that just as J. Okay, but actuality, if it contains a database row, we should also clear that database row out as well. So that's important. So let's write that up right now, right? We got to make sure that it gets deleted. It should get deleted. So if, right, let's check on that. J contains a value. If column J contains a value, we want to make sure. So how do we know that? We don't need this clear contents, J, right? J in the target row, clear contents. We want to clear it, but I don't want to clear it just yet. What I want to do is I want to clear the database row first. So if, let's double check this, range J contains a value, dot value does not equal empty, right? Then we know it's been saved in the database. Then I want to make sure to clear that out. That's super important. Then what are we going to do? We're going to do a few things, right? I want to make sure to clear it out in the database. So we're going to set the database row. So we're going to dimension the, let's say, item database row as long, okay, in case we have it. I don't think we've used it here. Let's see up item. Nope, we haven't set it as a variable. So once we do that, then I'll just want to do this. Inside the item database, order items database dot range. Okay. And what is that range? We need the item database. We're going to put that. We're going to define that in just a minute. Item database row and the item database row dot entire row dot delete. We need to define it though, so we'll do that right now. So we're going to delete that entire row and add the and sign there. And then what we'll do is that, what is that? It's going to be this one right here. We're going to set that into a variable here. And that is going to be the item database row. Item database row equals here, that value. Good. So we've got that set up. So now what it's going to do is we're going to delete that item directly inside the database. If it exists, right? That means it's been previously saved. So let's give that a try. We know it's been saved. I decide I want to save this. Let's refresh that order once again, load it up because we haven't deleted it. It's here, right? So now when I decide to delete it and I want to save and update that order, it is now going to be automatically deleted. So when I load that up again, you see we only have those two items. Perfect. That's exactly what I want. We're going to delete the item from the database only if it exists. Of course, if it doesn't exist, if we haven't yet added to the database, we don't need, right? So now it doesn't have a database row associated with that. So that's great. So continuing on. So we've got that here. We set the default quantity. We've cleared out the database if it exists here. And now what we're going to do is that's it. That's all we need to do is simply add items. But what about when on a name change, I want to set the address, right? If I make a change to this name and it contains an address, I want to make sure that that address, the city, the state, and the zip all get put into the following lines. So we're going to do that with this line of code. User makes a change to F5, and I want to make sure that F5 is not empty. Then what we're going to be doing, I also want to make sure that B8 is not empty. Remember, B8 is the row that's associated with that. Select the name row. If it does contain a row, if we know the row, then we can then extract the address and extract the city and state directly from that row from our names database right here. Because we know that that address is going to come from D, the city, the state, and the zip are going to come from E, F, and G respectively. So we can put those in accordingly. So we do that with the following lines of code. We're going to get that name row. We're going to extract that from B8. I'm going to take whatever's in FD, remember which is our address, and place that directly in F6. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the city coming from column E in our names, the state coming from column F, and the zip code coming from column G and place them all directly inside F7, separating them by spaces and a comma here. That's it. That's all we have to do to simply automate the address into rows F6 here and F7. Pretty simple there. This is assuming that we do have row. Okay, continuing on, there's another change I want to focus on here inside D8. Notice when we load it, when we make a change to D8 and we search for a particular order, we can load that order based on some change events to D8. So that is what's coming up next on a search change order. When we make a change to D8 and we want to make sure that D8 doesn't contain empty, then what I want to do is I want to check. The first thing what I want to do is I want to search it based on a row. If we take a look at this one, we have the search ID row here. So if I were to stop this code right here, let's take a look. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a change to here, enter 1 here, and we see that inside the code, we automatically have a search row. This search row is based on a match based on D8. We're ordering. I know that we have the order search row. This should probably be adding 3, but it's okay. Either one is okay. Plus 3. That's the correct row of the order, but it works either way. I know that because it doesn't contain empty, that it is a correct search order number, right? We know it's a correct order number because it contains a value here in B4, right? So we're going to base it on the match. So assuming that it is correct, then we know we can take this order ID and I can place it directly inside our located B5. I can take that ID and put it in B5. And that's just what we're going to do in the direct code. If B4 doesn't equal empty, if it is empty, please make sure to enter correct order ID, right? If it's incorrect, right, we can do that. But if it's not empty, what do we want to do? I'm going to take whatever is inside D8, that order number, I'm going to place it directly inside B5. Taking whatever order ID the user has put in here and putting it directly inside here. So that way, any order ID they enter is automatically go inside here, B5. Once they do that, it's automatically going to generate a row using the match formula. It's going to generate that row. And then what we can do is we can then load the order. So once we generate that row, we can run a macro called order load, and we'll go over that in just a moment, but I want to go over the remainder of the macros inside this on sheet. Now notice we also made some changes. Remember here correctly, when I made a change to the order date or when I made a change to our terms, we want that due date for both invoices and purchase orders automatically to update based on that. So that's simply going to be a change based on either on I4 or change based on I6, and certainly not on the order load. So the changes when a user makes a change, but not when we're actually loading in the order. So not those types of changes, okay? So we want to differentiate between different types of changes to make sure that we're loading the proper order. Okay, so how do we make the changes? So if the user makes a change to I4 or I6, and we know that the order is not being loaded because B3 is false, we then want to continue. So I want to also make sure that we have values I4, meaning the order date, I6, meaning the terms. I want to make sure that those aren't empty. If either one of those are empty, we can exit the sub out. I want to get the term row. This is very important because I want to extract inside the admin. I want to know what row this term is. What row? Is it row anywhere 15, 16, or all the way through 19? Once I know the row, I can extract the number of days. Once I know the number of days, I can then take the number of days, add it to the purchase order, add it to the date here, and then we can automatically get the due date. So we know that if we simply change this to 30, it's automatically going to extract that 30. It's going to be found looking on row 17. It's going to find this, and we're going to be able to simply add that to the order date to get our due date. So that's exactly what we're going to do inside the code. We're going to determine the term rows long. We're going to get that term row. What we're going to do is we're going to look for that based on whatever's in I6 value. This is our terms. We're going to look for it inside our named range called terms. And we're going to extract the row. If we've found it correctly, we know the term row is not going to be 0. I7, which is our due date, is simply going to be our order date plus whatever was found on column M and the term row. Column M and the term row of our admin screen right here. Column M and the term row is going to extract whatever number of days there. And we can use that to simply calculate our due date very, very easily. Great. So that is all we have to do for our particular worksheet change. We just went over all the worksheet change events located in there. We only have the selection change, a few ones. We've got 2 pop-ups here, and I just want to make sure this pop-up and this pop-up. I want to make sure that if the user selects anything, that those disappear, right? These two pop-ups. This one is going to be called add new group. This one is going to be called copy to group. So I want to make sure that both the add new group and the copy to group are not visible when the user makes a selection. If they are visible, we should hide them on selection change. So if add new group is visible, when user makes any kind of selection change, then hide it. And the same thing with the copy to group. If it's visible, hide it. So that's all we're doing with the selection change. So let's take a look at some of the order sheet macros. I've got just a few of them here on this order sheet, and then next we'll get into the order macros. Now remember, we had add and edit name. We had this on transactions. It was very simple. This is the macro that we're going to be doing when I want to add and edit that name, right? So it is exactly the same, but just with a few differences inside that. So it's automatically going to load up that name. And of course, if it doesn't exist, right? If it doesn't exist, let's say we have a new order, let's say add a new estimate, and we put in a new name, right, that doesn't exist. I want to make sure that we're loading that. When we load that up. No, it doesn't match restriction defined in the cell. That's okay. And let's update that. I do want to update that data validation. Actually, I'm going to update that through the code because I want to make sure that the code takes on. Notice that we did make that change, but it is the code that does it. So I'm going to go over that. So basically, the code automatically added the restrictions. If we take a look inside the added restrictions, we updated that, but I want to make sure that that error alert inside the code is unselected. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do that so that the error alert is simply just a warning and or simply allow and not the error alert. Okay, so that's going to allow us to enter anything we want because I want to make sure the user can enter anything we want if they want to do that. And how do they do that? Well, inside the code, right? We don't need that, right? So we want to update the validation. So if we go into the data, right, and advanced, we need to make sure that the error alert, this is what we want, click OK. Now we can do that, but we want to do that inside the code. Why is that important? Because it's the code that's going to change this data validation. It's going to update that from customers to vendors because it's going to be on a purchase order. So I'll show you how to do that because once we do that, we can then add James, right? So now James has been added to the list. And I'll show you how to do that inside the code. So that's what we're going to get into right now, but I want to make sure that when we edit it, either visit a new name or an existing name. If we remember correctly, both 8 and 9 is going to let us know that, right? So if we enter a brand new name, we know that B8 is going to be empty, and that's going to help us out. So with this, when we click on that button right here, this is the macro that's going to run this add and edit name. We're going to set the name field as control. The name row is long, just like we did before. We're going to clear out that entire form. All the fields in that form are going to be cleared out. We're going to focus on the orders. Again, if B8 here is empty, we know it's a new name. We're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to set whatever's in F5 this time, set it to that new name. We're going to set the customer name here. That customer name is going to be set to the type value, right? I want to know it's customer here. Set default to customer or vendor. Actually, it should say customer here. Customer name probably should be the customer or vendor, right? If it's a purchase order, we should set it to customer. If it's a vendor, let's do that, shall we? If, right, dot range B2 dot value equals, right? What is that customer order? We'll set that up. Right? I want to know if it's an invoice order, then we know it's an invoice. Then we want to set it to customer. Else, we want to set it to vendor, then vendor. So then, right, customer, else, and then end if, okay? So how we do it? So what I want to do is I want to set the default name. If it's a new name, probably, most likely, the user can change it, right? So either to customer if it's an invoice or vendor if it is a purchase order. So this is else purchase. So that's going to be here, purchase order. Purchase, right? Probably purchase order. So let's change this to purchase order. I'm going to change this because really only purchase orders use that. So purchase order. I'm going to check that name range to make sure that we got it right. So if we go into the formulas, name range, I want to check to make sure that it is the purchase order here. This is the one I want to know. Purchase order here. Purchase order. If it's a purchase order, change it to vendor. Everything else, change it to customer. That's going to be sufficient because both work orders and invoices and estimates all use our customers, while purchase orders use the vendors. So we're going to change this up. If it's a purchase order, then we're going to set this to vendor name, right? Otherwise, customer name. Vendor, otherwise, in every other instance, use customer. That's going to be much better. So that way we have an automatic default, and we're just going to change this to vendor. Good. Okay, I like that. And I'll show you how that's going to work and why that's so important. All other orders, and then this is only going to be for our purchase orders. Purchase. Good. And here's why I like it. So now when we enter, let's say a brand new, let's say invoice, right? and I decide I want to enter something new, right? If it doesn't exist, okay, no problem. I want to add a customer, right? So we figure it's a customer if it's on an invoice. But what if we're on a purchase order? If we're on a purchase order and we decide to add something brand new, right? Then what I want to do is I want to make sure the type is vendor, right? Default it to vendor. So that's all we did is differentiate the default to that vendor. So I think that's kind of a nice addition. And that's exactly what we did here. So we just differentiated. We're setting the default here. Okay, what I want to do is I want to set the name row. If it's an existing name, this is existing name. I want to set the default name row to B8. Excuse me, I want to set the name row to B8. Then again, we're going to do exactly the same as we did. Just run that loop, setting the name field as we've been over. Set that name field to those controls starting from name 1, 3 minus 2, starting at 1, going all the way to 9. And then just setting the values based on whatever's in there. And then saving that. And we're just going to simply load in whatever's currently in the database here, in the names database, loading it into that form using that loop. Then all we're going to do is just going to update the name type to our name type field, and of course the status field we're going to update from column J, and then we're going to display the form. So basically this loads all of the data from whatever's in the database up into that form, and that way if we have a brand new one, we can load, it's going to load the name in. However, if we have an existing one, it's always going to load in that name here. So that's exactly how we're going to do that. All right, great. So we see how that loads it in directly from the order form. And now what we can do is move on into adding the new menu. Remember, when we selected this here, it adds a new menu. So that's very, very easily. All we have to do with this macro is simply display this particular menu right here. I want us to display this submenu, which is just a group of 4 different shapes all together, grouped together, called Add New Group. So it is that Add New Group that I want to display when we select this button here. So when we click the Order Add New Menu, all we're going to be doing, and it's going to be a toggle. And what does that mean? The toggle helps because if I click it again and again and again, it's going to hide or show or hide or show. And that's exactly what I want. So what we have to do is we have to check, is it currently visible? If it is, hide it. If it's not, show it. And that's all we're going to do inside the code. If the order shapes Add New Group is visible equals true, then hide it. Otherwise, show it. That's it. And now what I want to do is I want to do the same thing with copy to menu. Now, if I have an existing, let's go ahead and pull up an existing order, and I want to create a brand new one, we're going to use copy to. Maybe I've got a purchase order, and I want to copy it over to an invoice, so I can do that just with this one line of code. Copy to is almost the same. We have the same group, but this is called copy to group. And again, it's just another toggle how we're going to do it. So that's all we have to do inside the code here is simply just check to see if the copy to group is visible. If it is, hide it. If it's not, show it. That's it. That's all we have to do. So just a few macros on this. Okay, now we're going to get into the order macros. We have the order macros. This is how we're going to create these new orders. First thing we're going to do, all these variables I'll be going over as we go through the code. We have order type as a string. Now we're going to set that as the order type. This is going to be the save or update. This is the order that's going to actually save. It's the order tied to this button. And I want to save or update it. If it is in a brand new order, new estimate or new order, we know that our order row is going to be empty located in B6 because there's. So if it is not, it is going to be an existing one, right? If it's an existing one, we know that it's going to automatically have a row located in B6. So that's going to be our differentiator. But the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we do have a vendor, a customer located in F5. That is a required field. If it is not, we want to let the user know to please save it. Now, I like a nice dynamic, right? If we add a new one, and I want to know, are we going to be adding it? So if I try to save this, it says, please be sure to add a customer before saving this estimate. I like that because it's dynamic. And if we take a look at the purchase order, and I try to save this, it's going to say, please be sure to add a vendor before saving this purchase order. So notice how vendor switched to customer, switched to vendor, and purchase order switched to estimate switched to purchase order because we're using dynamic variables inside that. So meaning if it's missing a date, if it's missing that name, we're going to show please be sure to add whatever's in E5. And what does that mean? E5 is going to be either the vendor or the customer. That is the name based on here, right? It's based on a formula. So please add a vendor or customer based on whatever's in E5 before saving this, whatever it is in B2, which is our order type right here, before saving this order type. Also, I want to make sure that they've added a date. That date located here in I4 is very important. We want to have an order date, whether it's a work order, purchase order, invoice, or estimate. We want to make sure that it contains a date. So if I4 is empty, please sure to add an order date before saving this order type, whatever type it is. So we don't need a type number. That is unnecessary. If it's in, we need to differentiate, just as I mentioned before, is it a new order, meaning B6 is empty, or it's an existing order? If it's a new order, we're doing just like we did before in items and also names. We're going to get a row, meaning the first available row in the orders database. We're setting the next order ID based on the max, so we're simply taking the next order ID, and we're going to place it directly inside B5 here. And then also what we're going to do is we're going to take that same order ID and placing it in the first available row inside column A inside the orders database. However, if it's an existing order, all we need to do is extract that order row from B6. And we want to set some variables. I want to know the order ID into a variable. I want to know the order date inside a variable. I want to know the order status. Also, the status is very important here. The status is going to come directly from D10. So I want to put that inside a variable. And I want to know the account that's associated in D11. That account is important for both purchase orders and invoices in D11. You could probably require this as a required field as well, located in D11. And then what we're going to use is we're going to use data mapping. All I'm going to do is, again, take the information, whatever's in these fields here, and map them to directly the order database. That means B2 or I4 is going to take on that order date here. D10, F5 are going to go inside these columns. We know whatever's in I5 is going to appear in the employee column, I6 and so on, and all the way through column L. And we do that here. For the order column equals 2 to 12, we're simply updating the orders database based on the order row and order column, whatever's located in those ranges located in row 1. So we're going to save the data to the database. Now what we want to do is we want to update the items, right? We've saved all the information inside the order here, all this information, but what about the items? We need to make sure that when we've added items, we want to make sure that those items get saved as well. And we don't know if they've been saved previously or not, but we're going to look inside column J. If they have not been saved, if there's no database row associated, we will assign a brand new row. If they have previously been assigned, we can use the existing row. It's hidden here using the 3 semicolons, but we know it is there. So we're going to check on that first. But first, we need to determine the last row of the items based on E34 and XLUP row. That's going to get us the last item row so that we can loop through all of the items. As we loop through all the items, in this case, the last item is row 12, so we'll loop from 10 to 12 in all of the items. If the last item row is less than 10, then go to no items, right? For the item row equals 10 to the last item row. We're going to check column J. Is there a database row that's already associated with it? If it's not empty, we have an existing database row. We're going to assign a variable, order item database row. That's a long variable based on whatever's in J. If it has not yet been saved, then we need to create a associated brand new order. We're going to look at the first available row inside, of course, our orders database, plus 1. That's the first available row. Our order items database is located right here. So inside this database, right, I want to find the first available row, which is 70, right? Inside that, we want to add the order ID, the order type, the date, the status, the account, then the item information, the total, and the rows. I want to add all that information inside the order items database. And so we can do that here. So we're going to set the row. If it's a brand new one, right, we're putting in the order ID. I'm putting in the order item row located in K, right? K is going to take on that order item row. K is going to take on the row of the item, 10, 11, 12. Remember, it's going to here, this row, 10, 11, 12, whatever row we're on. We're going to also want in the particular formula, this row formula, to take on the database row. So we're going to have to set that up in column L, and we're going to do that right here. Column L is going to take on this, column L is going to take on this formula right here. Then also, if it is brand new, I want to set that order item database inside J so that we know that it's been already saved. Okay, everything else we're going to do regardless if it is the new item or it is existing. We're going to, inside B, we're going to put the order type, the order date, the status, and the account. I'm going to put in those respectively, B, C, D, and E columns respectively. Then also in a single line of code, all the way from F through J, we're going to take on here, item, description, quantity, and amount. And the total, all the way is going to come directly from our orders, all the way here from E through I. I'm going to bring in all those information over here. Great, so we brought in those information. That's it. All we have to do is loop through the item and then just run our fade out message saved message. And this is the same type of fade out message that we've gone through before, so we don't need to go again. So when we go ahead and save those orders, it assigns those rows. They're not hidden now. We previously hidden them. Just remember, home, general, custom, 3 semicolons. We'll keep them visible for the training, right? But 3 semicolons will hide them right here. So we've added that up. And of course, if we decide to add a brand new item to that, right, we know that it hasn't been assigned a row. So we would have to assign a new row. As soon as we save it, it's going to assign that new row to that. That's it for how we save the orders. But what about a new order? New orders are a little bit more tricky because we don't know what type of order. Adding a new estimate, adding a new work order, adding a new invoice, or adding a new purchase order. And it gets even a little bit more tricky because I decided to add more features. Maybe from our main menu here, I want to add a work order. Or maybe from our main menu, I want to add a purchase order. So I'll also add an estimate. So how do we know just based on that? And I want to use a single macro for this. So if we look here, we've tied a macro. If we can, and that's going to be the same macro. So if we click N here, we see, I'll bring it up. We see it as this called order new macro. So it's the same order. It's the same macro whether I click here or when I go into the orders and then we assign a macro. It is the same if I click on one of the individual buttons here. Click assign macro here, we see it as the same macro, order new. So it is that macro. So inside this macro, we're going to need to differentiate between where they are, okay? So if they're on the home screen, I want to do this. I want to set them order types, right? If else, from the order screen, we're going to do some other things, okay? So based on where they are being sent from, we're going to make some changes. Okay, so the first thing, if they're inside the home screen, I've given these particular names, right? This is called estimate. This button, if they click it, this button name is called work order, work underscore. This is called invoice, and this one is called purchase order, purchase underscore order. So if they click this, it's the same macro, but the name of the shape that they click is different. Based on the name of the shape that they click, we know to add which shape, which order to add. So we can use that here. So if the active sheet is home, we're going to access from the home screen. The order type is going to be whatever the name of the shape that called it, but I really don't want those underscores. So I want to remove those underscores and replace them with shapes. So we know that our order type is going to be invoice, estimate, right? And however, but those are not the dynamic names, right? Those are the hard-coded names. These are these names. But what if they've changed it to proposal, right? I need to make sure that the proposal, right, is the one that goes in here, right? So that's very important. So how do we extract that? Well, first of all, what I want to do is I want to get the row. We know if it's estimate, I want to look for the word estimate from B8 to B5. And what does that mean inside the admin? I want to look for this estimate. If it's found on row 5, I want to return whatever's in here. So that way, if I change this to proposal and we go into the home screen, and this changes to proposal, and I click here, I want to make sure that proposal goes here, not the word estimate. That type should change to proposal. Very, very important. So inside that, it's also important that we update that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for order type, which is estimate. Let's take a look. I'm going to pause this right here. We're going to go into the home screen, and I'm going to click this. Okay. I want order type is estimate, right? Because that's the name of the application caller, the shape, name of the shape that called it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look from B5 to B8, and I'm going to look for estimate. And I'm going to find what row it's been found on. It's been found on row 5, right? If we take a look inside is, we see that it's found on row 5. So if I know it's found on row 5, I want to put in the type whatever is located in C and row 5. So as we continue, the order type now becomes whatever's in C and row 5. So the order type, if we move through this a little bit, we see the order type now becomes proposal. We've updated that. I also want the status type. The status type is going to be based on whatever the application caller is, in this case, estimate or edit. So that's fine. The status type. Why is that important? The status type, because we're going to have to set some status, right? We need to differentiate. Our status here is different, right? We have different dynamic data validation based on whatever type it is. Remember that. Remember that here inside the admin, we have this proposal, we have this. So we have all different types. So I need to know which one to use, and that's going to be based on that. All right, we'll change this back to estimate, and then we'll click it again to make sure that we have everything's functioning properly. Clicking on here is going to add it. Okay, let's continue on with the code. Let's reset the code here. And then we'll undo this. We don't need to stop anymore. Continuing on with our homepage and going to a brand new estimate. I really like the dynamic nature of this. It's very flexible. So what we can then have is continuing on with the code. So we're going to activate the order screen, right? We want to activate it. We don't want to activate the home screen. We're going to set the status. What if it's from the order screen? Well, if it's from the order screen, a few different ones. If I click here, we see that we've got two things. I've got estimate and estimate. I've got two different things. Now, this is going to be interesting here. We got two different values here that we can extract. One is the name of the shape. Okay, and two is the text within the shape. So let's go ahead and change that again. Oops, that's okay. Let's go. I want to change it one more time, and I want to show you again now how we can proposal. Okay, so we added proposal now, and now we're going to go back into the orders. Now, when I click add new, you see proposal is here. So if I've changed the text here, proposal, I can take this text, which is the estimate order. We're using that named range, right? Estimate order to change the text here. I'm going to use that text and I'm going to place it directly inside the order type. And I'm going to use the name of the shape estimate as our status type, because I'll go into the status type and why that's important. Okay, I know it's a little bit confusing, but it's very helpful. So when I click proposal, I know to take whatever's the text of this shape, the text, right? The text inside the shape and put it here. And that's exactly what we're going to do inside here. The order type is simply the text of that shape, the text, right? The text of the shape. The status type is the name of the button, right? Remember, every shape can hold two data values. One, that's what I like. Shapes are so great because they can hold a lot of information. It can hold whatever's in the text can hold one, whatever's the name of the shape can hold another. And here we're extracting two different values from the same shape. However, there's one other thing. When we delete an order, when I delete it, I will always want to make it automatically go to this. So let's go ahead and there's something else here. When we delete an order, I want it to set a default to new invoices. So let's go ahead and just create a brand new order here. Just a simple order, a simple estimate, and then we're going to delete it, and then I'll show you. So I'm going to save this order, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete it. I sure want to delete it, and then I want to set the default. This proposal has been deleted, and I want to set the default to go back to invoice. When we delete an invoice, we also create a brand new one. So if the user has deleted it, where should we set the default? What should it go back to? I just say, let's go back to invoice and show clear invoice. So that's all we're going to do. If the order type is delete order, it would be delete order because the name of the button is called delete order. The shape of the name that they've used is delete order. We're setting that up here. Then what we're going to be doing is setting the order type equal to the invoice order and the status type to invoice. So basically we're just setting the default. It's invoice if they've deleted the order. The order type would be delete order when we delete it. Okay. All right, great. So continuing on, what we want to do is I'm going to set that order type, right? B2 is going to take on whatever order type. You saw that. Automatically B2 updated automatically as we added inside that. And then what we're going to be doing is I want to set the order type number. Now I want to set a number based on the order type, basically 1 through 4. And we can simply use the match based on the order types. The order types is a named range based on this. It's a dynamic, actually it's not dynamic. It's just a named range called order types based on these 4 possible. So as they change, we're simply going to look for proposal and we're going to find it and we're going to return 1, 2, 3, or 4. And we're going to have that. That's going to also help us inside that. So back into the orders we go. I'm just going to return the 1. Continuing on with our code. So we're going to set that order type into a variable, a long variable. It's going to set that order number. B3, I'm going to set this to load, right? I'm going to set it to load, and then by the end, we're going to set it to false. I'm going to clear the contents of all the order fields, just using clear contents. I'm going to set the current date as default in I4, and I want to set the next order ID. It's a brand new order, so whatever that next order ID using the max formula here, we're going to set that up into B5. So B5 is going to take on whatever's in B7, and that's going to set the next one. I also want to basically hide that add new group. Remember, when I select something, a new work order, I want that group of shapes to be hidden. So that's going to be hidden right there. Then what I want to do is I want to clear the validation in 3 different cells, D11, D10, and F5. So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look inside an invoice here. Okay, so D10 is our status, D11 is our income account, and then we have our either customer or vendor here. So those are all validations, but they're dynamic based on the form that's used, right? Because we know that this is going to be a status. If we take a look at this status and we go into the validation here, and we look at the data validation, we see that this is called status invoice. So however, if we create a brand new one, let's do purchase order, and we take a look at the status here, We go into the data validation here. We see that this is status purchase order. So what I want to do is I want to make sure it's dynamic. But before we update or change any validation here, we must always first delete any validation. So that's the first thing we're going to do. All three of these, they get their validation deleted, okay? And now what I want to do is I want to add a brand new, I want to set that status type. This is where that status type is very important. Remember, that status type is either invoice, it is purchase underscore order, work underscore order, or it is estimate, right? And that's going to go in here. So that's going to be the status and the status type. Why is that important? Because look in the formulas and name manager. Let's click on status, right? We have status estimate, status invoice, status purchase order, and status work order. So those all pertain to the individual statuses here on our admin screen. So I want to set the data validation based on those. So that's very important that we do that. So we're going to set it. So this way we can dynamically place the status. The formula of that's going to change automatically. If there's an issue, we'll wrap it around on error. Okay, great. So now what we need to do is we need to add additional validations, right? We've added the status here. No matter what it is, the status is going to change no matter what. Now I want to add a validation income or expense accounts here. I want to add a validation vendor or customer here. So we can do that with the following based on the order type. So we're going to use select case based on that order type. If the order type is an estimate, I want to make sure that that customer name validation gets added to F5. Also, if it's a work order, I also want that customer name added. I guess we could add it here and here. If it's, in other words, we could use a comma here and then work order. That would probably be okay too. So we could combine these two. That would be pretty easy. But if we want to add additional things to estimate or work order. Okay, but if it's an invoice order, I want to do a few things. F5, of course, is going to take on the customer. D11 is going to take on our account income. Remember, I want the income accounts associated with this. When we create a brand new invoice, I want D11 to take on income accounts only. We have income accounts, we have accounts income, accounts income here, and we count expenses. Expenses is going to be for purchase orders, and income is going to be for invoices. Okay, so we have both of those here, both expenses and income here. Okay. All right, so expenses was here, okay? All right, so we have both of those, but I want to make that update. So we know that if it's an invoice, right, our validation is going to be formula accounts income. However, one other thing, I want to set the default income account. Remember, if we have sales income, that income came from a direct location. That came right from here. It's called our invoice income account named range located here in G11. I want to set this as our default account. If I were to save it, change it to other income, and then if we create a brand new invoice here, and it's automatically going to change to other income as I've already demonstrated for you previously. So I want to make sure that that gets done, and that gets done directly in aside here. So we're going to place that right here. Invoice, this named range, invoice income account is going to set default in D11. Okay, great. Well, that's all if it's an invoice, but what if it's a purchase order? If it's a purchase order, we want to add the vendor name, right? We're going to be pulling down vendors. So we know that when we add a brand new purchase order, I want that drop-down list to be a list of vendors. So if we take a look in the data validation here, we see that it is vendor name as opposed to an invoice where it would be customer name. So that's what we're differentiating. Invoice, work order, or estimate would be customer name. So you see the difference in the data validation. That happens directly through here. This formula gets added based on that. Okay, in D11, we want to take the account expenses. Remember, it's expense accounts that are associated with purchase orders. So we want to give the user the option to select which expense accounts, but we do want to set the default expense accounts as to whatever we added directly inside here, called purchase expense account. So whatever purchases are, that is the one that we're going to be using inside those orders for purchase orders. So that's the one that we want to set for purchase orders. That material purchase is going to show up directly inside D11 right here. Great. So that's it. That's all we need for the validation. That's updated validation. Now we just need to update default payment terms and purchase orders on invoice and purchase orders. Remember, invoice and purchase orders, we've set a default payment term, right? It's net 15, but if I want to change that, I can change that to net 30. I want to make sure that we look for that default so that when we create a brand new invoice or a brand new purchase order, that default gets set automatically right here into I6. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to be doing is I want to determine what row is that status. What I want to do is I want to look for that little check mark. Inside our status here, we've got a named range called here. Actually, I don't think, from D, I'm not sure. I don't think we have a name range. N15 through N21, I want to look for this check mark. Now that check mark inside VBA or character code is called character 252. So I'm going to look for character 252. How do we know that it's character 252? Well, if we insert, right, a symbol, and we want to insert a symbol here, we can look for that check mark here, and we see that it is character number 250. Oops. And we see that it's character number 252. Okay, so we know that it's character 252 from our character there. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for that. So here, I do have default status row, status default, and status type. We're going to be doing, oh, sorry, this is for the default status. Sorry, we're going to get to the default. Oh, here we go. Default payment terms. I almost skipped it. Default payment terms here. Then we're going to focus on status, then footer message. Okay, so again, as I said, that named range, N15 through N21, I'm going to look for something. I'm going to look for that character 252. That's that little checkbox. And I want to extract the row from it. And I want to put that row inside this variable called term row. If it is found, meaning it is not 0, all I want to do inside I6 is place whatever is in L in the term row. What does that mean? That means we found where there's a check mark. We found that it is on row, let's say it's row here 17. I want to return whatever's in L and whatever's been returned, whatever that row that it's been found. It's been found on row 17. So I'm going to return whatever's in there, L. Okay, so that's all we need to do, and returning that directly inside here, and that's going to be placed directly inside I6. Great, so we have that set up, and that's all we do. Now all we have to do is default status based on the order type. Remember, we've got some default statuses too. Pending. Remember we showed you that purchase orders have pending, whereas work orders may have unassigned. So we have default status. We've set that up directly in here. Our default status is here, here, or here. So our default status is whatever we've checked. Again, we're going to look for the character, but we want to look for it in a specific column. Now, how are we going to find that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to find it in here. Default status and the status type. Status default. I've created named ranges for this. Let's take a look inside that. Formulas, name manager, and it's going to be called status default estimate. Here we've created one, so it's here. Actually, this should be one more row probably. And then what we're going to have is status default invoice here. So here, oh, it's dynamic. That's good. I like that there. So it's dynamic based on that, which is perfect. So what I want to do is I've created a named range called status default and then whatever it is. So what I'm going to do is look for that, look in that named range, status default, look for the row that has been found, and then return whatever's in the previous row. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to set the row. We're looking for that character. We're looking at we know the status type is estimate, purchase order, invoice, or work order. So this completes the named range. We're going to look for that checkbox inside that, and we're going to extract the row. If we have the row, then all we need to do in D10 is going to go admin, default status row, right? And the admin, we know the row, but what is the column? The column is based on whatever column our range is here. What is the range of that status and the status type? This is our range where it's found. I want to extract the column where that range is found. So our status could be status invoice, status purchase order. I want to return the column that range is found in. If I know the column here and I know the row, I can return exactly the status that I want. So that D10 is going to place the default status based on whatever the user has set up directly inside here. So we know that if we decide to set this to ordered on brand new purchase orders and we create a brand new purchase order, we know that default is going to be set to ordered. Great, but we also have footer messages, the last default that we need to set up, right? When we create we have default footer messages. I know it's comprehensive. I'm telling you. I hope you have more than one coffee. So I've got our default set up here, 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 and here. So we can be based on a column. So let's take a look at what column number. That column number is going to help us. We know that estimates are going to appear in column 18, 19, 20, and 21. Okay, so we know based on estimate work orders. So if I know, here's where it's going to come in handy, that number. If I know that our default is in column 18, and I also know that if it's an estimate here, proposal estimate, same thing, that this is order type number 1, I know what column to look for it in. So that's going to help us, right? Because I know it's a column. So our default footer message row, what row are we going to have it on, right? I want to know, I want to extract, I want to know where the check mark is, right, for the estimate. This is our estimate. So if I know the column, I want to know what row is the check mark. I need to know what row to put this, where to find the check mark. Is this our default estimate message or is this our default? So having that in there, it's going to put that in here. So we continue on. So we're going to look at that. So it's going to be based on, here our admin, we're going to look through a range. And where's the first row? The first row is 28. That we're looking at first row is 28. Where's our last row? Our last row is 39. Now what column? It's going to be column 17 plus our order type. If our order type is 1, meaning estimate, it's going to be here. If our order type is 2, work order, 3, invoice, so our order number is going to help us determine what column. So we know the first row, but what is our order type? Remember, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. Plus 17 is going to be our column. So that means the estimates would be on column 18 and so on. So I know that. So this is going to develop our range. This is a dynamic range. So our order type in all the way to look. So we're looking from row 28 to row 39. Inside column 18, 19, 20, or 21. And what are we looking for? We're looking for that character 252. And when it's found, we're going to extract the row of it. That row is going to tell us exactly what that footer message should be. As long as that row is not 0, then D9 is simply equal to admin F and the default footer message. How do we know that? We've extracted the row. We're going to take a look inside F. We've got the row. And I'm going to place whatever has been found in that here, and I'm going to place it directly inside here, our default footer message located in D9. And that sets up our default footer message. Great. Now also we have copy 2. This is almost exactly the same. And copy 2 is a great little feature because it allows us to quickly and easily copy whatever we have. If we have a work order, let's say we've completed the work order and we want to now create an invoice based on this, all we need to do is just click here and it's going to create an invoice based on that. We can just update the totals if we want to very, very quickly. Can automatically copy over it. Or maybe we want to take an estimate or an invoice and automatically create it. If we create, let's find an estimate here. I think, or maybe purchase order. There we go. So let's say we have this estimate and we want to also create an invoice based on this estimate. All we need to do is use copy 2 and it's going to automatically create an invoice based on that. So I like that ability to have that. And so how are we going to do that? Well, of course, we're going to use mostly what we have. We're going to set some very specific, just as we did before. We have some very specific names in here. Estimate here. Remember, this stays the same as our estimate. The text updates to whatever the user has changed it to. So notice that the name of the button is still estimate, but the text is proposal. That's going to help us out tremendously. So the order type is based on the text inside the shape. In this case, proposal. The status type is based on the name of the button, which is estimate. So the status type stays the same. It's not dynamic. However, the order type does. B2 is going to take on the order type, just as we did before. The order type number is going to stay B1, just like it did before. Everything else is the same, really. All we need to do, however, there's a little bit different. We're going to hide that copy 2 group, right? So we're setting the order load false, doing everything we have. And then what we want to do is we want to make sure that we setting the order load to true. It's good enough as it is. I like it the way it is. Okay, so there's not too much difference here. So again, once we have extracted the order type and the order says everything else stays the same. Everything else stays the same. However, there's a few differentiations. When we clear out the information, remember, we're clearing the contents. There's a big difference here. Clearing the contents here and clearing the contents here. Notice there's a lot more fields when we're adding new and then we're copying to, right? Why is that? Because when I create a brand new one, I want to clear out all the fields. However, for copying to, I want to clear out only specific fields. I want to keep all of these fields here, but I do want to clear out any database rows associated with that. I also want to clear out the order ID. Actually, order ID when we copy to should be cleared out. But notice the order row, actually that's fine. We're taking the next order ID, we're placing it here. The next order ID has not been entered to the database, which is fine. So our order row is empty, and this tells Excel make it a new order. So as soon as we save this, a new row gets assigned. We have new database rows assigned. So when we copy to, we're not clearing out everything. We're only clearing out things that are associated with the database. We're clearing out the order ID. We're updating this to the next order ID. So that's why we're clearing out just more limited fields in our copy to here. Limited fields, not in the, we certainly don't want to clear out all the data inside. We don't want to clear out all the items, so that's very important. So that's it for copy to. Everything else is the same, because once we copy everything to, when the user clicks save, it assigns a brand new ID, it assigns a brand new row, and all new database rows, so that way it gets assigned a new record. Very, very easily to do that. That's copy to. What about order load? Remember, order load, that's what happens when we click 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever we're clicking here. We automatically enter that. It's going to automatically enter. So that's going to be on order load. When we order load, we need to know the search order. We need to make sure that B4 contains a value. We went over that just briefly. B4 is going to be based on the order ID of whatever is located in D8. The user will enter an order ID here. It will determine the row of that order. If it's not empty, we know it is an accurate order number. We can then take that order number and place it directly inside of B5. And that's what we're going to do here. So we certainly want to make sure if B6 is empty, we know it's incorrect. B6, of course, here is our order row. We want to make sure that. However, when we make that change, we do that all in the change event. Orders, we went over that already. Remember, on D8 change, we're taking care of that. We're placing that order row here. Then we're running the macro order load. So we went over that already. Now we're ready just to make sure that B6 doesn't contain, it must contain a row associated with that. If it is empty, we got to let the user know. Otherwise, we're going to extract that and put that into a variable here, order row. We want to set the order load to true as we clear out all the contents of the fields to making sure that everything gets cleared out. And we're going to turn off application screen updating. We're going to, again, load all the information using data mapping, right? Just as we did before, bringing in all the data from the database, because we have an order column and we have an order row, so we can bring in all the data. We're setting the order type into a variable, and we're also going to delete the validation just like we did before, and we're going to update all, remember, also on order, right? Also, we load order. I want to make sure that those are income accounts. I want to make sure that the status here are all the statuses for those for only for invoices. And I want to make sure that only this is associated with a customer, right? And not vendors. Because when we load a purchase order, things will be very different, right? So, or work order, things are going to be different. Okay, so we want to make sure to do that. Okay, because purchase orders, of course, are going to have vendors and different counts. So we want to make sure, just like we did before, deleting the validation and using select case to update all of the validation, except we're not putting any defaults in here because it's not a new one. Great. So we're going to set the status type. We're also setting the status type here. And then what we're going to do is we're simply going to update the status type just as we did here. Now what we have additional loading items, right? We want to load all the items. I need to load all the items associated with this order, all the items associated with order 5. And that's going to come directly from our order items database here. So what we want to do is create a filter based on some criteria. Now that criteria is going to be based on order 5, right? We know inside the orders B5 is going to take our order ID number, so we can use this formula to create a criteria. Then we only want to extract those items with those specific on order 5. And I want to get the item, description, quantity, amount, row, order row, and row. And bring all those in here. And we're going to do that with an advanced filter. Okay. So first of all, we need to know the last item of the last order item database. I want to know the last item here, right? Because we're going to create an advanced filter. So we need to know the last order item is 80. So once we do that, we're going to put that into a variable. If it's less than 4, that means we don't have any items. We're going to set that advanced filter based on the order items database, A3 through L. So we're going to set all the way to L, right? We're going to use criteria N2 through N3, and we're going to have those results appear directly from R2 through W2. So I'm bringing those results in, having our criteria N2 through N3, and those results from R2 through W2, making sure that that's correct, R2 to W2. Good. Then what we want to do is we want to determine the last row of those results using column R, right? So that last results row based on column R of that database. And if it's less than 3, that means we have no database items. We're going to skip and go to here. If we do have results, we're going to loop through those results from 3 to the last results row. We want to set that item row based on the order items database, V, that order item row. That order item row is very important because we need to know what row to place it. Row 10, row 11, row 12. Where are we going to place the values? Here, here, here. Okay, so we need to know that. Okay, continuing on. What I want to do is I want to take all the names, item name, description, quantity, and amount, and I want to place them directly. So we can use that. So E through H is simply equal to here R through you. So that's all we do through this line of code or through you. And then I want to add that database in. That database here, that database row must go into column J here. Normally it's hidden. Okay, so we're going to place that there because we have to know it's coming from there. These are hidden, right? That's why these don't show up. Remember, these are hidden, right? Using that just until you don't know why they're showing some. This is custom or number formats. They should be hidden. With these 3 semicolons, it's going to hide them. These are not hidden. So okay, perfect. So we know that bringing that item database rows, we're going to set our order load back to false, and then we're going to turn on screen updating. Perfect. Great. So we're almost done with these orders. We've done a lot. So I want to be able to print. So we've covered add new, copy to, we've covered save and update. I want to print the order. That's simply all we've already done is just set the print. We know that we have a very fixed print range, right? We know it's going to come all the way from here. So this is our print range right here, these cells. So when we do page layout, we can just set that print area. It's going to be fixed. It won't be changing because we have a very specific invoice. We did do a training, if you want to see a few weeks ago, how we can do unlimited rows for unlimited items on a multi-page invoice. That was kind of helpful. So we've got a print area. So all I need to do with the macro is just simply print it out. So orders, print out, and then just add in these variables, right? We know what we have. If we remove the comma and then add it in, we can see all that it's from page, to page, copies, preview, active printer, print to file, false, and then we ignore print areas, false. We want to make sure that we are keeping those print areas. When we want to email it, I do want to email. You saw that briefly earlier. If I want to click email, I want to email that order. And then what it's going to do is going to create a PDF and then automatically email that order. So that's going to help print it out. It's going to put it into a PDF and automatically email that order. As you can see down here, this purchase order created inside an email. So what we want to do is I want to set that email to whoever our vendor is or our customer. I want to set some default subject. I want to create a PDF using that. Relatively simple. So we're going to go over that. So first of all, the file name, I need to set a file name. Where are we going to save that PDF? It's going to be based on the current workbook path using this workbook path. I'm going to add a backslash and along with B2, right? I want to add in what type of file, right? If we noticed in that PDF that we just created, it's going to be called, it had a very specific name. And the name is going to be that file name, the folder. So is it an invoice? Is it a purchase order? Right? So when we create that PDF, we see that a very specific PDF called purchase order and then _5, right? So I want to make sure that that B2, that order type, along with that purchase order, get inside that name, make sure that file name. So we're going to add B2 _B5. That is going to give us the name and then a .pdf. If for some reason that file exists, it's going to create an error. We try to create a new PDF. So we're going to kill it, delete that file if it already exists. We're then going to use export as PDF, file type PDF. And so we're going to export it out into the PDF using that file path. We can export it out, right? Using the PDF, using that file name. And we do not, if we want to display that PDF, we would mark this to true. We're going to set that Outlook application. We've already, Outlook app and Outlook mail, we're going to use late binding. Those two right there have been defined as objects here. So we're going to use late binding. We're defining the Outlook object here, Outlook app as an object with the Outlook application. I want to create that email, that initial email, set that Outlook email to create item. This is going to create that email. Once I create that email, I'm going to set that to whatever's in B10. How do we know what's in B10? B10 is the email. We're going to use that. I've used that. I want to use either a vendor or, of course, I want to base it on a work order. If it's a work order, I'd like to email it to the employee, right? So that would be kind of nice. If it's a work order and we've selected an employee, I want to email it to the employee. Think like Lisa. Let's say I want a Lisa. So generally, we'd probably email a work order to an employee. However, if it's a customer, a purchase order, or work order, I want to email it to a customer or vendor. So we need a little bit of a formula to help us out. If the work order type is a work order type, why don't we index whatever is located in I5? That's our employee name. And I'm going to index our email. We've got a name range called emails. That's for all the emails for our name range. And we're going to look for it in row, basing it on the match in I5. So this is going to extract the employee email. However, if it's not a work order, if it is an estimate, invoice, or a purchase order, I want to email it to whoever we've put inside B8. So in this case, we're going to index the email based on whatever's located in B8-3 because we already have the name row in here, right? If we set a customer here, we already have the name row here. So that way we can extract, if it's a proposal, we know, let's go ahead and put in a customer name here, that we can extract the email from here. So we can get the email. So based on the form type, we're going to, either the email is going to be from the employee or from that. So we're going to set that inside the two, whatever's located in B10. we're going to set that as the customer. Actually, I should put that as, or employee email. Could be all three, either one of those. Okay, we're going to attach that file name. We've already created that, right? We've created that PDF file right here. So all we need to do is add attachments. And we add a dynamic subject. Please see the attached. We want to know if it's an invoice, the order type right here, right? And also we want to know the whatever's in B5, and I want to make sure that they have that number, that ID number here. And then nothing for the body, and then we're just going to display it. If we want to send it right away, we'll use .send. Okay, it's cleaning up. I'm going to set that out mail nothing. Okay, the last particular macro for this particular module, then we're going to be dashboards, and I think that's going to be it. Delete, right? We want to make sure that we're going to delete the order. If B6 is empty, right? B6 is empty, like in this case, because they have not saved it. So if I decide to delete it and I say yes, it's just going to simply clear it out and go back to the default order, which is invoice. However, if it has been saved before, we know that B6 is going to contain a value. We can extract that order row directly from here. So we know if order row is going to go to not saved, it's going to skip all the way down here and go to not saved. However, if it has been saved before, we're going to take that order row and put that into a variable here. Then what we're going to do is we're going to delete that from our orders database using order row and order row entire row delete. We're deleting it there. I also want to set the order type based on B2 because that's very important, right? I need to know how we're going to deal that and update that. So with the order items database, we also need to delete all the rows associated with that. So if I just decide to delete this, I need to loop through these. I need to extract, get these orders, determine those database rows and extract them, or run an advanced filter and do that as well. So we can do that with an advanced filter, meaning I'm going to run an advanced filter. I want to know all of the rows associated with this one. And I want to run an advanced filter to do that inside the orders database. So we're going to take that order ID. I want to know all the items associated with that so that I can delete them, but I want to delete them in reverse order, meaning I want to start in row 5 and go to row 4. I always want the highest row first, so we do need to sort them. So we're going to run that advanced filter, getting all the rows, right, determining the last row. Then if the last row is less than 3, go to no database items, okay? So we don't need that. However, if the last row, actually I'd probably do if the last row is less than 4, then skip sort, right? Because if there's one item, we don't need to sort it. So let's do that. If the last row is less than 4, right, because that means there's just one row of data, then let's go to no sort. Go to no sort. Okay, I like that better, and so we'll skip the sort here, and then no sort, okay? Okay, so we can do that there inside no sort. We don't need to sort it there based on that if there's just one row. If there's more than one row, we're going to run sort based on that. We're going to clear any sort. We're going to base it on W3, right? I want to reverse these. I want the highest row first here. When I delete them, I always want to delete the highest row first. So sorting them based on W3. And I want to make sure they're sorted descending the highest first. We're going to base it the range, entire range, sort that entire range from R3 to W. It's going to sort all this entire range. Once we have that, then I can then delete the rows. The result row equals 3 to last results row. I'm going to set that order item row based on whatever's located in W. Then I know what row to delete. So we're going to set this delete row. We're going to delete that entire row very easily enough. So now we have that inside there. We probably don't need this right here because we're already set on that one. Good. So now continuing on. So now all we need to do is just let the user know that it's been saved and run a brand new order. That's it. So that's all we need. So if I decide I'm going to delete this order right here, we can do that right now inside the orders. So all we need to do is just, let's say, enter one of the old orders that we just created and then delete the order. And I sure want to delete the order. Yes, purchase order has been deleted. We got the message and now it goes to the default. Okay, great. So that covers the orders, right? This we don't need here. Don't need to test that. Very good. We also have a very cool home screen. Then we're going to get to the dashboard. If you take a look at this, the home screen, relatively simple. All we have is just a few macros that are going to help us out. Clicking on the application macros here, we've got go to sheet. This is going to help us. So how do we do that, right? So for these few, all we need to do is just name the shape, whatever the name of the sheet is. So if you see this, transactions, or you see this called dashboard, and then this is called items, and this is called admin, and this is called orders. So if the user clicks on any one of these, all we need to do is go to the sheet based on whatever the shape name is. And then another one, we have home, same thing here, home, right? So the same macro can be used for all those. And that same macro is called menu go to sheet. So all we need to do is take the name of the shape and activate the sheet associated with that, as long as the name of the shapes are exactly the same as the name of the sheet. The shape is exactly the same. So that's all we have to do. Just one sheet will do just that for us. So relatively simple. Now it's slightly different. We went over this already inside the home. Remember, we went over these. These eventually will do a little bit differently. This one, we're actually going to go to the sheet, so we create a brand new one. Remember, this one we've already shown you on this one. Let's just take a look at that under the home. Remember this one, the macro that's assigned to this. Let's go to assign the macro off the screen here. Remember, that's called order new. Remember order new, we went over that one. Remember, just inside the order macros right here, or order sheet macros here, order macros here, all the way at the top, order new, we already went to inside the order new. Remember, if it's a home screen, we did all of this based on whether they're coming from the home screen. So we already covered those. That's going to create automatically the new. So that's it for the main menu. Very, very simple, just creating these shortcuts. Okay, cool. But what about the dashboard? Let's time to get to the dashboard. This is a really, really cool. On our last screen that we're going to go over today in this marathon training, right? So we've got a profit and loss, a period profit and loss based on the period that they've selected, right? And we also, I don't think we have much, I don't have much, very much data in here, a little bit, but we have this year. As we see, we've created additional data here. So how do we create this really cool date range? Well, the first thing is we do understand that we have this date range here that we've created a named range called date range. So it's called date range. And then what I want to do is basically when a user makes a change to this date range here, let's go ahead and pull up our headings for now. And what I want to do is if they make a change to E3, I want to then add that from date to H3, and I want to add that to date to K3. And of course, that's going to be based on whatever the user has set here and here. Okay, so to do that, we make sure that's going to be a change event based on a change event on E3. So let's take a look at that. Inside our dashboard here, we're going to make a change to E3. Okay, so if there's been a change, what I want to do is I want to dimension the date range as a string and the range row as long. And then what I want to do is I want to set AA1 to true. What this is going to do is just set us a temporary field right here called AA1. I want to set the date range to true. The reason is that I need to differentiate between when a user makes a change, right? If they make a change to here, that's one type of change, or maybe the user makes a change to here and we can set. So there's two different types of changes, one here and one here. And I want to differentiate those two types of changes. And I'm going to use this field, true or false AA1, to differentiate those. So I'm going to set this to true and then back to false when the user makes a change to E3. So we're going to do that for right here. A1 equals true. We're just going to set it back to false when we're finished. So we're going to set the date range to the target value. And basically what I want to do is I want to see what range they've chosen, right? If I take a look inside here, inside the code, I want to know what range this year. I want to know what row it's found on. I want to know that that's found on row 17. If I know it's found on row 17, I know that Q17 is the from date. And I also know that S17 is the to date. So that's going to help us. So we're going to extract that row using the find function. And we're going to base it based on the date range, right? We're going to look for the date range that they've entered, and we're going to extract the row. If it's found, then our date range is not going to be 0. Then again, all we need to do is inside H3, place whatever's in Q and the range row, that's the from date. And then S from the admin screen, that's the to date, you're going to place that in K3. Then can you calculate that just to make sure? Then you're going to set A1 back to false, and then we're going to run the macro that refreshes the dashboard. That dashboard is going to help us out, that refresh. Then also, if they make any change to either one of these, if they make a change to either H3 or K3, I also want to refresh the dashboard too. That's going to come here. If the user makes a change to H3 or K3, and I want to make sure that H3 and K3 are not blank, right? Checking to make sure they're not blank. Then I also want to make sure that AA1 is false, right? Because that kind of change, I don't want to run it twice. So making sure we're going to refresh the dashboard. So basically on any kind of a change, whether it's an individual date change or on a date range change, we want to update the data. That's going to update this data. So how are we going to do that? So let's take a look at some of the macros on this data refresh. So this dashboard macros here, all the way up here, we just have a single macro. Here it is. Let's see right here. I want to make sure we show this dashboard refresh. First of all, we notice that we have some pictures associated. these pictures are associated with this. I want to know the top 10 products to order, right? I want to know what items we're running low on. I know that we need 14 coffee, right? We're running low on this, and because we have a minimum set. How do I know that? Well, if I take a look inside our items database, and we're also going to focus on the transaction to calculate remember, we still have to go over this formula right here, the quantity on hands. I want to know how many items to order. So if we look inside that coffee crema beans here, coffee, beans crema, I want to know that our minimum quantity is 30, but we only have 16 on hand. So we're short 14, right? So if I take a look at the dashboard, I know we need to order at least 14 of them. We're short that. So that's the number one order. We're running short on that. So we know we've got to run that. So how do we know that? Well, again, the first thing what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're going to run an advanced filter so we know all the details. So I want to clear all these pictures out. That's the first thing we're going to do inside this macro. So these items are all called item pictures. So if we take a look, say it says item pick 12, item pick 13 here, and 11, they're going in reverse order, 10, 9, but they all contain the word item picture. So that means we can delete any item picture here. So we're going to loop through inside the dashboard, all the shapes, any picture that contains item picture, we're going to delete it. Now what I want to do is I want to get the data for the profit and loss. We'll go in order on this, okay? So the profit and loss, I want to get the data that's going to contain this profit and loss. I want to know all the income, all the cost of goods sold, the gross profit, and that. And that's going to come directly from our orders database, right? I want to extract all that, and I want to put it inside here. So we're going to have that. Dashboard results. I want to get the profit and loss. So the best way to do that is run an advanced filter based on the dates the user has selected. If we take a look back in our dashboard, I've given these named ranges. We see that this is called from date, the named range here, and we see that this is called to date, the named range here, right? So knowing that's going to help us create an advanced filter. So I want to know all of the orders from this date to this date, right? But I don't want to know just all the orders. I really want to focus on purchase orders, and I want to focus on invoices because those are all purchases. And I also want to know all the transactions, right? So we also want to know all the income and expenses from here. So we got to combine two rows of data here. So let's take a look at that. So the first thing what we're going to do is focus on the orders database. I want to clear all the existing contents. We saw some data right here inside our orders database. We saw some data here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear all the data from here, AA3 through AE. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to clear all that data from right here. Then we're going to determine the last row of the orders. If the last row is less than 4, it means we have no orders. What I'm going to do is run that advanced filter, but I want to copy down the balance formula. I want to know what balance is, right? That's very important. I'm going to copy down the balance formula. Here's a formula, right? And we're going to copy this down to all the last rows, just bringing it all the way down to the last row. So once we've done that, it's going to come directly from M to that formula, M4, the last one, bringing down the balance formula. Then we're ready to run our advanced filter. It's going to call from A3 through L, all of our orders here in our order list, A3 all the way through L, right? And then I don't need the balances in that. That's just help calculate. And I want to use some criteria. The order date, right? I want two order dates. It must be greater than or equal to from date, and it must be less than or equal to to date. Greater than or equal to from date, less than or equal to to date. And the reason I have two there is because I want both the invoices and purchase orders. I want to include both of these, right? Because the invoices are where our income is and our purchase orders are where our costs are associated. So I want both of those. If we're focused on our profit, we need to know both income and our costs. So invoice contains our income, purchase orders contain our costs. Both are very important. So our criteria is going to be S2 through U4. S2 through U4, all that. And I want those results to come directly inside here, AA2 through AD. So our results are going to come AA2 through AD2. Then we're going to determine the last results row, AA, right? I want the last results row. If we take a look at this, here we're going to get our order type is here. Invoice all the way to here. Actually, it doesn't include this, so this is, we'll delete it. So that's going to give us the results. I'll show you how the rest of that comes, right? And that's important as well, but I'll show you that in this step. So we're going to bring in all the information here. So that's going to get us our last row. If the last result's less than 3, we're going to go to no orders. Then what I want to do is if the last results row is less than 3, then put the last results equal to 2, right? I just want to set the last results row. It's either going to be 12, or if there's no data, we're just going to set it to 2 or 3. Was it 2 or 3? It's going to set it to 2 because I'm going to add on top of that. Don't worry about that. I'm going to set it to 2. The last results row is 2, right? Because there's no data. So what I want to do now is I know that our invoice we have all of our invoice and purchases. But in this application, we also have transactions. Transactions include expenses and income as well, right? We've got income and we've got expenses. So what I want to do is I also want to bring in all the information through our transaction database based on those dates, right? So I want to know all of the transactions based on those same dates. So we have criteria greater than or equal to the from date, and also want it less than or equal to the from date. I want to bring in all of that information based on the transaction dates. I want to have those results come here, and I want to bring in also those results. I want to bring it on top of that into our orders database here and have that appear down here. So that way we have all the information here. So actually bringing it down to right here, and then bringing the type of expense or income would show up here. So that's what we're going to do. So you see, as soon as I refresh this dashboard, just by clicking here and we go back into the orders database, we now see that we have all the additional information. So we're going to also go through the transactions. We're going to focus on the transactions, right? So we also want from our orders, we want all of our invoices and all of our purchase orders. And from our transactions, we will also want that. So the last row based on our transactions database, if it's less than 4, go to no transaction data. So we're going to run an advanced filter from A3 through F inside our transactions database here. A3 through F, right? I also want F is fine. We don't need the memo in here. Our criteria is going to be right here. We can also use this V2 through W3. That's sufficient enough, right? 2 dates. I want to lessen this. So that's all with through 3 is fine here. So that's all we need to do inside here. Where we are, V2 W3. That's sufficient enough, not the 4th one. Okay, so that's our chart. I want our results to go into AA2 through AD2. Our results must go here. AA2 through AD. And I want all the results to come down here. I want the type, the date, the amount, and account. Notice it's very, very similar to our orders database here, right? Order type, order date, the amount, and the account, right? Also the same, right? Because I want it almost the same. Accounts are going to be the same, right, in here. So we're going to extract the transaction database, and I'm going to bring it right down in here. So going to determine the last transaction row right here. The last row is going to be based on column AA. I want to know the last transaction row. In this case, it's 10. So I want to take all this information, and I want to basically copy it over, and I want to determine the last row of our order database, which was right here, and I want to paste it right in here. Just paste those values in here, or maybe it was one above here. So basically, I want to paste it all above here. That's what I want to do inside here. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So once we've determined our last row of our expenses, we can then bring it all in information. So our orders database, AE3, formula. Oh, I forgot. I want to bring down the formula right here. So here we combine the two of them. Almost missed a line here. We're combining them. Our orders database, AA in the last results row +1 through AD in the last results row +1 plus the transaction. Basically, all we're doing with this line of code is taking all the results from our transaction database right here, all those results, and simply bringing them over to the next available row right here. So just bringing them all over here. And then what we're going to do, now we have all this data. Then what I want to do is I also want to know, not only do you know the account, I want to know the account type. Is it an income account? Is it a cost of goods sold? Or is it an other expense account? And so we can use a formula to determine that right here. So all I need to do is look it up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this account here and using a formula determine that account. So that formula is, I'm going to use is error. I want to check, is it an income account? The first thing we can do is run the match. And if it returns an error, we know it's not an income account. But if it's false, we know it is an income account. So we're going to use the match. If there's no error, we know it is an income account. So we're going to, because I'm using a match, the account's income, I'm matching whatever's in AD3. If it's false, we're going to set income. If there is an error, then what we're going to be doing is we're going to index the expense accounts types. Remember, we had a named range called expense accounts types, and that was right here inside our expense. I want to basically index this. I'm going to look up for the expense. I'm going to match it. I'm going to determine what row, and I'm going to return whether it's a cost of goods sold or other expense. And we're going to bring that directly inside here, and I'm going to copy that all the way down here. Otherwise, if there's an error, show empty. So what that's going to do is going to return the account type, bring it all the way down here. Once I know the account type, I can then create a summary based on that. That's all we're going to do here. So great. So the last row here, and then all we're going to be doing is bringing down that formula, getting the last row, basically in AA, getting that last row, bringing down that formula. Once I know that formula, our Excel formulas can take over. So we have our dashboard P&L. All I need to do is create total income, cost of goods sold, and then simply do a sum if. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to summing all these columns based on the column types. So if it's an income based on the type income, I want to sum it here. If it's a cost of goods sold, I'm going to put it here. I want to know the gross profit, which is simply the total income minus the total cost of goods sold. And I also want to know the other expenses. We're going to use sum if other expenses. And then the net profit, which is simply the gross profit minus that. Now, if we go into our dashboard, we see that we just need to create some links. So I just created some simple text boxes to link actually to those fields. So if we take a look here, we see that we have a text box right here. So this text box here is located to orders DB AH3, orders AH4. So these are all text boxes simply linked to that background. Let's move that nice little picture back up here. Not this one. This one, and I just add a little bit of a picture, although you can almost not see it, and a coffee picture here, which I kind of like. So we have this. So these are all just text boxes simply linked to these fields right here, all the way so I dimly linked them. That's it. That's how we do our profit and loss. Okay, continuing on with the code. Let's focus on our get transaction for actually we did that top 10 needed items. So we've covered data for the profit and loss. We see how we did that. Now we're going to focus for the top 10 needed items. Remember, in the dashboard, I created this. I want to know the top 10 needed items. So I need some code to help us out with that so that we can determine all the items that we needed. So how are we going to do that? We're going to focus on the items database. So that's going to take our focus right here. And again, we've created some criteria. And what I want to know is I want to know all of the items that are inventory, right? Remember, we don't want non-inventory items. We only want inventory items. And I want to know where the minimum quantity is greater than 0, right? If you set a minimum quantity to 0, then we don't need it. But I only want to know those which the minimum quantity is greater than 0. And I want to return all those items and the information here. So I want to know of the item, I want to know the picture, the minimum quantity, the item name. I want those results to come in here. Then, using formulas, we're going to calculate the quantity on hand and the quantity needed. So let's take a quick look inside the VBA here. So the first thing what we're going to do is we're going to clear any previous results. That's burn all the way from T3 through X. Clearing all these previous results here. We don't need those results there. Then what we're going to do is determine the last row. If it's less than 4, exit, right? I'm going to run an advanced filter, just as I had mentioned to you. Q2 through R, those are going to be our criteria, right? Making sure that we have an item type of inventory and a minimum quantity of greater than 0. Q2 through R3, make sure that's set to R3. I want the results come through T2 through V2, all of those results right here. Then we're going to focus on quantity on hand and both quantity needed. Once we determine the last row based on column T, if it's less than 3, we'll go to no items. Then what we want to do is we want to create a formula. Now, I've created a formula. We need to know the quantity on hand. Essentially, the quantity on hand is all the items that we have ordered minus all the items that we have sold, right? That's essentially it. But what we want to do is I want to make sure that we order. So I want to know the order items, and I want to base it on the status, right? I need to know the status, right? If we've just ordered them, we don't necessarily know that they're in stock. So we want to sum all the order items based on the quantity, based on the item name, right? So this specific, and I want to know the order type. If it's a purchase order, only if it's a purchase order, and the status equals P8. What does that mean? Basically, what I want to know is I want to know all of the items that we ordered through purchase order, but I only want to know those statuses where we receive, right? I want to know this or this, right? P8 or P9. If it's a purchase order and it's pending, those items are not in our stock. If it's ordered, it's not in our stock. If it's shipped, it's not in our stock, right? I only want to know those purchase orders where they have this status, received or unpaid, or receive paid, because those two statuses are the only ones in which we actually have the inventory, right? So I only want to sum purchase orders with those particular statuses, either one of these two, either P8 or P9. So I'm going to take all the purchase orders with P8, add in those, and all the purchase orders with P9. I'm going to add those in. Only those two. So that's what we're going to focus on. So only those with status of P8 and only those with status of P9. So I'm going to add in all those purchase orders, and then I'm going to simply subtract all of the invoices in which that particular item came up. So we're subtracting all the quantities, right? Order items quantity, those are the order items, the quantity. We're subtracting those from the invoices. So again, every item, every specific item that we have ordered that is either received and not billed or received and in stock, minus any items that we've been invoiced. That's going to get us our quantity on hand. Now, how do we know the quantity needed? Well, the quantity needed, if we have a minimum quantity of 5 and we only have 3 in stock, we know we need 2. So once I copy down these formulas, I then want to automatically sort it. And the graph isn't going to actually be opposite. So when I create a graph, it's going to start at the bottom and go to the top. And that's what we do. So I'm sorting it based on the lowest to highest. So that way inside the graph itself, inside our dashboard, it's going to show highest to lowest. So that's what we're going to do inside the code. So once we have our results, we copy down our formulas. Our formulas located in W1 and X1. Here's our 2 formulas located in the items database, W1 and X1. I'm going to bring down these formulas. That's going to set automatically rows. But I'm really only focused on the top 10. So once I sort them, we're going to take care of that as well. So how do we do that? Moving on inside the code, right? I want to make sure that when we bring down those formulas and check to make sure that we actually have last row. If it's less than 4, we don't need to sort them. And then I want to set the last row. The last row is going to be based on 12. So we should probably move that down here, but for now we'll keep it up. So we also want to sort the fields, right? I want to sort all of the fields. And I want to make sure that they're sorted based on X3, because why is that? I want to know the top ones, right? What is going to be the top ones? Inside our data, I want to know X3, right? What is the most quantity we needed? And I want to put it down here. So we're going to sort them based on X3. I want ascending, right? I want the lowest first because that's what the dashboard. Then what I want to show is the last results row. I want to run that sort based on T3 through X, right? That's what we really want to focus on here, T3 through X. So when I pull up the item database, I want to sort all this information here, and I want to know the last. So we can That's it. Once we create our graph, we're going to create our graph based on the quantity needed. So that's what we're going to do inside the code. We continue on here, and we're going to add the pictures. Once we sort it, I want to add the pictures. We're going to set that picture folder. We know the item picture folder, making sure that we have a correct picture folder. I want to set an initial left position and not top position. I want to place all the folders inside the dashboard. I want to place this. I will be making a few adjustments because it's not quite exactly. It's almost perfect, but I want to make some adjustments based on the last row. So I'll be making some adjustments by the time you get it. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to set the last position. I want to create these pictures and have these pictures appear next to the items. Since we have the pictures, we might as well use them. I'm going to set the initial left position based on N6, and I'm going to move it 48 pixels to the right. Top position based on N6 and 4 pixels up. We're going to loop through all the results row from the last results row from the bottom to the top, right? I want to go from the bottom to the top. Why do I want to do that? Because I want to make sure that we're going to the highest ones possible, right? The last ones possible. So we're going to start at the last row. The last results row is less than 12. We only want 12 results, right? We don't want greater than 12. We're going to set the minimum to 10. So it's going to go from 12 to 2, or 12 to 3, setting the maximum of 10. What we're going to be doing is we're going to run a loop, right? Then we're going to set the picture path, right? I want to set that full picture path. I know inside the items database, if I've got the picture file name and I've got the folder, I can have the full picture path combined. So that picture path is simply going to be the picture folder with the backslash based on whatever's in column T. We're going to insert that picture. We're going to give it a specific name called item pick and the result row. Then what we're going to do is we're going to place that picture on the top position after we've inserted it. We're going to set the left position. We're going to bring it over based on the name, right? I want that based on the name. If I know the length of the name, right, this item name, right, some of the shorter names, I want to put the picture closer to them. If we take a look in the dashboard, we see that this name is a lot less characters. So I want to bring that picture closer over. However, this one here has got a lot of characters. I want to keep it on the left. So we can use this formula to determine that 26 minus the length of the name multiplied times 4.5. And basically that just space out the left position accordingly so that we can space it out so that it stays to the left of the name. Since we're not basing it on any cells. So the height, setting a specific height of 25 and a width of 25. And then we're going to increment the top position plus 31. So that's going to bring it down, bring that picture down along with the ice. So it's going to keep going down. That's how we're going to supply the pictures. Then all we need to do is just simply create this graph based on the data. So if we select the data, we see that we've got a graph based on the data that's supplied here. We're going to be showing the quantity needed, and then all I want to show is the items associated. So we just created a bar graph to show those very simple items. And that's just created, I want to show the labels here. So that's all we've done here. Great. Next up, what else do we have to do? Well, we also want to get the sales data based on a range, right? I want to know this sales data, and I have to get that based on a range. And then we're going to create a pivot chart based on that. So if we take a look at that, we're going to focus on the orders database because that's going to get us our sales data. We're going to again, we're going to clear the existing data. We've got some more data going back inside the orders database here. And we're going to see here, we've got some sales data. So let's take a look inside. We're going to be clearing out AK3 through AL999. So AK3 through AL, I want to clear all this sales data, right? I want to bring it in here. So I want to know all of it. Bring in that based on whatever sales that we've created. So, but we don't want to create, I don't want all the sales data. I want to base it on very specific criteria. And what is that criteria? It's going to be based on S2 through U3. Let's look at that criteria. S2 through U3. I only want order types of invoice, and I only want them based on the very specific dates that we've created. So that's what I want to return, only invoices, not purchase orders, and I want to bring that data directly inside here. So that's what we're going to do here. The last row, I'm going to run our advanced filter, S2 through U3, bring in that data over. Once we have that data, I can then create a pivot chart based on this. So I've created that, and we create a pivot chart based on that. So as we bring this information down, we have a dynamic pivot chart based on that. And then I just created a graph based on that. So if we take a look inside the dashboard and we look at the data based on that, and we see that the data is based on this total data, based on this information here, this mini accounting application, and we base it on all the data here inside our orders database, the sales pivot data, sales data pivot. That is the same data that's correctly right here, this sales pivot data. So if we take a look at the data, we see that this sales data is directly based on here. So we just created a chart based on that, just a little bit of a line chart, not giving it any backgrounds, and just giving a little bit more information here, adding some fonts and things like that. Relatively simple on that. Nothing too famous on that. Continuing on, I also want to get the outstanding invoice data. Now that outstanding invoice data, we're going to create this cool tree map for both outstanding invoices and outstanding bill payments. But first we need to get the data. So that data we can use, of course, inside an advanced filter. We're going to have that data the same. We're going to use our criteria AQ2 through AS. How do we know that? Let's take a look inside the orders database here. And I'm going to be looking inside our AQ. So we have outstanding invoices criteria. Certainly we want to know it's an invoice. We also want to make sure the due date is greater than less than today, right? It has to be less than today. And I also want to make sure the balance is greater than 0. So I want to know all the invoices with that criteria. And I want those results to come directly here and bring those inside here. So it's going to bring all the data inside here. Then what I want to do is I want to create a tree map based on that. So if I decide that we're going to insert, right here, tree map, I just want to insert a tree map here. It's going to be based that on here. And then we're going to customize that tree map based on that data here. So we can select that data here. And then of course we can make the updates. So, right, if we don't want to include the particular order ID, we can just include the name and we can create the name. So there we've also done that here, just this little tree map here. And then I can just simply move the chart, move it to a different, and that's just what I did here. I moved that chart. So if we take a look inside the dashboard and I just updated the colors, we can update the color to this blue, which is a little bit of our theme. And then we can customize it here. If we decide we're only going to add data labels here, we don't want a chart title, we don't want a legend, just data labels. And then I've increased the font, made it bold and white. So that's pretty much it. And I've done the same thing with outstanding bill payments. Outstanding bill payments, exactly the same. I've created, however, differently. This one is a little bit different. If we take a look inside our order database here, if we move it over here, this time I want outstanding purchase criteria. I want to know only those purchase orders. I want to know a due date is less than the current day, and I want to know balance greater. So those are bills that we owe, and I wanted those results to come right in here. And then I've created another tree map directly, just like I did there, and put it here. Wow, what an epic training. For those of you who stayed till the end, congratulations. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. Let me know in the comments that you stayed till the end. I want to hear from you. What did we learn in this training? We learned how to create an incredible mini accounting application, complete with a home screen where we could quickly go to any screen. We also created an amazing vocabulary where we could fully customize an application based on the end user requirements and then have those new names throughout the application application. We learned how to create this incredible order screen, whether we're creating proposals, work orders, estimates, invoices, and we showed you how we can easily, quickly change those on just the thing to automatically update the application and update the end user's experience on that using conditional formatting, data validation, creating orders, creating inventory. We also were able to add pictures and items in inventory and quantity on hand. We also showed you how we can quickly and easily edit customers, employees' names, and also add new ones. Of course, we were also showing how to email, print the orders, copy to orders, quickly create a brand new order based on an existing order with our copy to. And of course, we had transactions where we can create multiple transactions, selecting transactions, quickly locating existing transactions based on multiple filters, whether it's date, name, account, or amount. How to create an incredible comprehensive admin screen using named ranges to help us quickly locate default settings. We had that dynamic tax date ranges and a whole lot more. And also this incredible dashboard where we're able to show a dynamic date range. Thank you very much for sticking with us. I appreciate your continued support and I look forward to bringing you many more applications. Don't forget, I've got a whole ton of you if you want to support this channel. So many great ways, including the 250 workbook. Pick that up. I'll make sure to include this as a bonus inside that. Of course, you're always welcome to download using the links down below. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Have a great week.